How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we got a great dialogue coming our way today. We're going to be talking about the recent report that was released from the TDCJ that talks about the escape of Gonzalo-Lopez. There's a lot to cover here, so we're going to ask you to bear with us. This report is a very detailed report. It's a very well done report. In the process, there's a lot that we could learn. So it's not just about pointing the finger. It's about what can we take from this report to be better. I just want to go ahead before I introduce our guests, Russ and Joe. So all three of us are going to break down the report. I just want to announce my sponsors. First sponsor we got is American Military University. If you guys are looking to get a degree, seek higher education, please check out American Military University. Very supportive of what we do in corrections, very supportive of what we do here on Tier Talk. And again, guys, we really do need to have some people with experience going back to those schools, getting those degrees, and really teaching those young minds. We also have Guardian RFID for mimic tracking and cell checks, the cloud-based business and artificial intelligence. Guardian RFID digitally transforms jails, prisons, and juvenile detention facilities of every size. Visit GuardianRFID.com for more information. And guys, if you get a chance, there's great tips and videos that they have on their YouTube channel as well. Please check it out. And we also have Inmate Manipulation Decoded. That book is available on Amazon. It's a book that's being used for training. So please, guys, check it out. It's actually been certified in Montana. And, it's definitely got some knowledge that we need our front line to have. So if you get a chance, again, check it out. Link is on Amazon. And we also have Lessons Learned While Working in a Prison, My Journey from Officer to Administration. This book is filled with tons of nuggets. I mean, literally passages supported by other professionals in the field. And again, once you read it, if you want, you put your own notes in, and then you pass it up to someone that you feel has the greatest potential. And again, it's a great book, guys. That's also available on Amazon. Link is in the description. Russ, what's up, Russ? You mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Not at all, Anthony. My name is Russ Hamilton. I am a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I am also a former senior juvenile correctional officer. I currently work for a private company that does re-entry and rehabilitation work at a local probation department and a local county jail where I am the case manager.
Well, it's good to have you on again, Russ. It's going to be a fun dialogue. And we got Joe Pomponio. What's up, Joe?
What's happening, guys? Good evening. My name is Joe Pomponio. I am a retired lieutenant with TDCJ, retired police officer as well, and a current panel member with Anthony and Russ on Tier Talk.
And we love having you, Joe. Now, guys, to get right into it, because it's a big report, it's about 50-something pages. This report is coming to us from CGL. So a little bit about CGL. They are inherently recognized experts in justice facilities, specializing in facility planning, design, maintenance, and operations. Looks like they're out of Miami, Florida. And they were founded in 1974. They have since grown into the largest, most comprehensive criminal justice consulting firm in the world. Their vertically integrated 360 justice service platform provides justice owners with significant facility cost savings, increases the life of the facility, total understanding of the facility and operations, speed to market with a single source solution, and reduced risk and comprehensive plans that work. And they are considered the leading provider of justice facility planning, design, program management, and maintenance solutions. I got to admit, I read this report, guys. This report is detailed. I mean, what's your thoughts on this report, Russ?
I got a chance to look at some of it, and I really like the way they did it, because they didn't just go in and only analyze the things that happened that day. They looked at this from a comprehensive viewpoint, and they factored in everything, I think, that they could with regards to the causation of what occurred. It's easy to just point fingers or just look at what happened in a single small window, but they really, really went over every single thing that could have impacted everything that happened on that fateful day. As well they should, because there was a massive loss of life. Five innocent souls died because of what happened on that day.
Yeah, and guys, there's a lot that report covers. It talks about everything from security lapses to understaffing, which could be the root of it all. But Joe, what was your thoughts when you initially read the report?
I was blown away by the report. I mean, it was so comprehensive, so transparent, so unbiased that it was shocking. In comparison to the TDCJ serious incident review, That CGL report was definitely in depth, and definitely I could definitely say they didn't pull any punches with it.
All right, so let me go ahead and get this in position. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to go right through this report. So let me go ahead and share the screen. So first thing we got here, I just want to talk about the incident real quick. This comes from the executive summary. On May 12th at 10:21 a.m., inmate Gonzalo-Lopez was placed in a secure section of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice bus for transport to the WJ Estelle unit for a routine appointment. Slightly over 2.5 hours later, inmate Lopez had removed his restraints, cut his way out of the secure section of the transport bus, which we got pictures. We'll show you that later. Attacked a transport officer and escaped from custody. 21 days later, inmate Lopez was located and killed in a shootout with authorities. The serious consequences of this escape cannot be underestimated or understated. A correctional officer was attacked and stabbed multiple times, and authorities report that 5 innocent citizens lost their lives at the hands of inmate Lopez. Hey, Joe, real quick, Joe, when this first broke out, and then obviously you hear about the escape, and later on you hear about the 5 lives that were taken. How did that affect you being a TDCJ, at one time being an employee of the TDCJ, a proud employee?
God, man, it made my heart sink. To hear, I mean, escape attempts in prisons are more frequent than the public knows about. TDC's had escapes before, nothing of this magnitude, and every escape we've had in TDCJ history, we've always gotten our guy back in custody within 72 hours. Hearing this, it made my heart sink. I automatically knew that there was a critical and just a catastrophic failure from the get-go. For somebody to get away with a bus, successfully elude law enforcement, and we find out almost a week later that this guy killed 5 innocent people. Man, it made my heart sink as an employee. My thoughts and prayers are definitely with their families. And, as short-staffed as TDCJ is, my heart and prayers are with them bosses too, because I know the guys that are left behind are fighting that fight. And, just hearing that, my God, man, it still brings chills to me when I even think about it.
Well, I mean, and Russ, working in corrections, especially on the custody side, our biggest thing is our service to the public. So when there's an escape, and then God forbid, you do have citizens that are killed, how does that affect you when you hear things like that? Just even if it's not CDCR, just in general.
Well, just to know that kind of a failure took place. The reason the prisons and the jails exist is for really one reason only, and that's for public safety. And so when we find out that something happened where whether it was our facility or our department or someone else's, to know that primary mission failed, it's time then for us to all look and take a good hard look at ourselves, a good hard look at our policies, procedures, our manning, our staffing, and everything else, because this is not acceptable. This is completely outside the pall, and we have to do something to fix it.
Right. Now, you actually spoke about scheduling, which is great. That's what we're going to go to first, or our staffing. I apologize. So I'm looking at the numbers here. So now, first off, we're going to look at the agency itself before we get to the Hughes facility. So this report right now talks about the numbers from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, the agency itself. I came up with a number that was very close to 24,000 and change, maybe closer to 25,000 of officers that they should have. That was the number that I came up with based on the stats that are here. When they talked about at one point being 32% down, I took the number 7,613 and basically came up with 24,000 and change, maybe 24,300. I forget, but it was around 24,000 and change. So it says here, like most correctional systems in the United States, TDCJ has faced unprecedented challenges in the last 2 years. The COVID-19 pandemic has altered and stressed every aspect of the correctional facility operations, from the acceptance of inmates into the system to the housing, management, and programming of the inmate population. This growing number of correctional officer vacancies, exacerbated by COVID, has reached crisis proportions in the state correctional facility. Now, look at this, guys. The agency is already down 14% in 2017, at the end of 2017, which gives them a number of 3,653. So that's what they're down in 2017. They got a little bit better in 2018 with only 13.3% down. And again, that left them with 3,436. Then it goes up again, sadly, to 17.6%. Again, 4,500 got down, and then 17.6, pretty much even, 4,300. But look at this increase from the end of December 31, 2020 to the end of December 31 to 2021. We are down 31.6%, literally from 4,302 in 2020 to 7,598. And then a slight increase in April 30th, which was 6 months later, to 7,613. So, that's the agency. But let's get more specific. Let's get to the Hughes facility. That's the facility that Gonzalo-Lopez was at prior to the transport. And to finish off the agency thing, it does say in the last 2 years alone, correctional officer vacancies have risen from 4,302 to 7,613, which we just talked about, and that's an increase of 77%. So over 32% of all correctional officer positions were vacant in April of 2022. That's 32% at the agency level. So guys, that's at the agency level. Correctional officer vacancies levels vary from facility and region at the state, depending on the available labor market and the completion for jobs. At the Hughes unit, where inmate Lopez was housed, correctional officer vacancies were even more pronounced. So now you got December 31st, 2017, we're down 39 officers, 39 custody staff. Then we literally quadrupled to 28%, and we're down 157.5 staff. Then in 2019 and 2020, it did go down, which is good, to 15% and 16% from 28%. But then again, with the COVID, December 31st, 2020 to December 31st of 2021, you get that huge increase, nearly over double, from 16% to 35%. So now you're down 192 officers. And then in 6 months later, you're at 43%. And you're down 235. And it says in the month prior to the escape, so this is April of 2022, 43%. That's 235.5 out of 547.5 authorized positions of the Hughes unit correctional officer positions were vacant. Hey, Joe, real quick, Joe, before we go into the next part, in 2019 and 2020, it did go from 28% to 15% to 16%. So it actually, vacancies went down. What was it there? Was there increase in pay, job market? What was going on?
No, it was actually an increase in job market during that period of time. Down here, a lot of the oil fields were laying off due to the oil prices. And during that time, a lot of the staff that were getting laid off from the oil industry were actually coming to TDCJ. That spike that you see prior to that, that's actually the staff that left to go to the oil field industry when they opened it up. And of course, the oil field industry here pays damn good money. So, during that time, that's when we actually had all the massive layoffs through the pipeline, and that was closed and all that stuff. So that's where we gained back a bunch of employees. The other thing you got to remember too is the Hughes unit, where it's located in Gatesville, is approximately 24 miles from Fort Hood, one of the biggest Army bases in the free world. And, they do a lot of recruiting from that base as well, for soldiers who are on terminal leave. And, they go up there and recruit at their out processing center. to try to keep them something in a uniform, you know, with a discipline style structure.
So you always had that, definitely that competing for the job market. So that again, that's where, and we'll get to that later on. That's where that, you know, the incentive to bring people in and definitely retain them becomes difficult. Now, if you go to this next part, talks about priority posts. So the reality of the severe correctional officer shortage is experienced on a daily basis by custody supervisors responsible for filling required security posts on each shift. TDCJ has identified priority 1 positions that must be filled on each shift at each facility. Per policy, priority 1 positions are those posts that must be filled by custody staff for the basic security and operational needs of the facility. Closing a priority 1 position requires the approval of a regional director, but because of inadequate levels of correctional officers, operating with a high number of closed priority 1 positions has become routine. This was especially true at the Hughes unit on the day of the escape, where 42 of the 160 priority 1 positions were closed due to staff shortages. You can see it there, guys. And then goes due to correctional officer shortages, 27% of the priority 1 positions were closed on the 2 shifts that prepared inmate Lopez for transport. These staff shortages required the remaining staff to carry a heavier workload and increase the amount of overtime they were assigned. This contributed to establishing a weakened security environment that better facilitate inmate Lopez's escape. Hey, Russ, let me ask you a question, Russ, because a lot of people, when they see this, they may just see numbers, but they may not really see how it affects a facility. So when we're talking about priority 1 posts, we're talking about posts that are needed. And then there's always could be posts that could be considered non-essential. And what I mean by that, guys, is that if the facility is running on bare minimum, non-essential may be like, hey, we can't run programs today. So the officer that we usually stand at education, we need them here. Or for meals today, if we had officers, you know, working with bringing those meals in, guess what, guys? At this point, we're just going to, you know, deliver the meals to the cell, treat everything like it's a lockdown unit. But then you also may have the non-baselines, which are trips, like court trips, whatever it is. But Russ, when you see that they're cutting priority 1 post, in your mind, what do you see happening to the facility?
So just the fact that, you know, there's a delineation there between, you know, priority 1 or priority 2 tells you that they're already trying to deal with a staffing situation that's, you know, just out of control. When you look at it, you know, doing that priority 1 thing, well, we're going to keep all of our priority 1s and we'll have all these priority 2s that we can slash. Well, what you're really doing is you know, you're just trying to throw a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, a huge, enormous gaping wound, as it were. And you're trying to, you know, develop some kind of hierarchy where you can just, you know, manage to get by. And that's the real problem is when we're trying to get by, there's a lot of things that are going to suffer. You're going to have searches that are going to suffer. You're going to have the ability to respond to serious incidents that's going to suffer. And by those incidents, I mean the ones that are likely to happen inside the facility. Also, on top of that, you're going to start, you know, having to potentially do like rolling lockdowns from, you know, one unit to another, or a full lockdown of the prison. And that doesn't make things any better because that, you know, impacts the population. And then they start to get surly. They start to get unruly, unmanageable. And pretty soon you have a lot of different moving parts that are starting to strain against each other. Sooner or later, something is going to give.
Yeah, and guys, I want to mention something at the very beginning of this report. When they do the executive summary, they highlight 2 things: understaffing, which at this point we're very familiar with, and then the security lapses. Guys, in corrections, and it's going to mention this in the report, we have a series of fail safes. And for something like this to happen, for an escape to happen, it's not just one mistake. It's literally a series of mistakes. But before we get into that, Joe, you have a copy of what a schedule looks like. And basically, this is actually Joe's going to break it down to us of what a supervisor has to do when you're working at an understaffed facility and you start having to make that decisions of, oh my God, I got to start closing down some of these priority posts. So Joe, do you mind talking us through that real quick?
Sure, absolutely. I'll try to use this one because this is probably about the best example. This way you can see a true picture of this is what we call a shift roster. Over here on the left-hand side, you got all your category 1 positions, what we call priority ones. You know, your perimeter pickets, your central control bosses. You got your picket bosses for there's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L. Those are pickets that there's 3 housing areas per picket. Then you go into the dorms where we have the severe handicapped, segregation, which is our restrictive housing, and then you go into the housing officers. And as we get down this list a little bit, I'm going to tilt it. You can start to see the words not filled, not filled, not filled, not filled. Okay. Now, on the opposite side of this roster is what we call category 2s or priority 2s. These are, when you have the staffing, you can staff these, as long as all your priority 1s are covered. But I mean, you can look at this and see all the not fills. I mean, you in essence on this roster on this particular day, I had one officer working 3 pods, 100 cells apiece. So one officer responsible for 300 people. And I mean, every day was a game of cat and mouse and robbing Peter to pay Paul. And when you don't have when you don't have the people or the bodies to staff all your category 1s, we have to send what they call a email. Let me see if I can find that booger. It's an email that we have to send to our unit warden, giving him a breakdown of what we actually have and what we don't have. And he is the one that gives us the authorization to go ahead with that. And he also has to send it. He also has to send it to the regional director. Now you see on this particular day back in July, on the GPs, on the general population side, I'm authorized a total of 70 officers, which 45 is what they had assigned to that shift. 26 of them officers were on regular day off, 2 on approved leave, 4 call in, 2 on leave without pay, 4 miscellaneous. Okay. That gave me a grand total of 10 officers, okay, to run 29 category 1 positions. On this day in particular, I was able to get 4 4-hour overtimes, which is a 12-hour shift, and an officer stays for another 4 hours working a 16-hour shift. I was able to utilize 2 people on their regular days off for overtime, and I had to use. We also have part-time officers here that normally work just visitation, but I had to utilize part-time officers on that day, and that gave me a grand total of 18 out of those 29. And even with those overtime, I still had 9 priority 1 positions not staffed, and I had to idle 2 of them. Down here we had to list our deviations as to what wasn't staffed and why it wasn't staffed. On this particular day, both of my sergeants that were assigned to me, I had to put on duty post. I had one on a constant direct observation, and then I had one running my searcher's desk for chow. And on top of that, I had 2 more constant direct observations. So, by looking at, the numbers sound good on paper, but in the physical plan, in essence, you're playing a dangerous game of robbing Peter to pay Paul on a daily basis.
Would your constant direct observation still be part of? It's not part of your original priority 1.
No,
post, right?
It's not considered a priority 1, but because it's a constant direct observation, right, medical, because they're a suicide risk. No matter what, you have to put an officer in front of that cell 24/7 until medical calls it off, or the psychiatrist makes rounds and calls it off.
Yeah, it's what we would call a non-baseline. It's what's needed at the day. Okay, I got trips, I got a constant watch, I got to get those covered. And they're not a priority 1 post, but they are a priority post.
Absolutely.
You cannot have that constant direct observation without an officer there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now I want to get a little bit more into this report. This is where we're going to start talking about the security lapses. Let's see. So let me move this over.
Now, I don't know, Anthony, on the CGI report or the CGL report. It talked about the staffing vacancies at the Hughes unit that day, and I wanted to read something just real quick from the TDCJ series. Actually, gives a better picture of the staffing on that day.
Yeah. Again, I'll put you in a solo.
It says the Hughes unit staffing on May 12th, 2022 was at 57%. Now, that's officers that were actually assigned to this facility. That's not counting your FMLs. That's not counting anybody who's out on any kind of time. The unit was allocated 556 officers, and at the time, there was only 318 positions filled. It says staffing available for operations on this day was 34 general population and 19 restrictive housing positions. That's all your category ones. It says 21 general population and 12 restrictive housing priority one positions were not staffed on this day. So 21 out of your 34 gen pop was not staffed. And 7 or 12 out of your 19 was not staffed, leaving a total of 7. Of course, it goes on to say that the regional director, so-and-so, was advised and approved the staffing for this date. So that kind of gives you a little better picture.
I was just going to actually say. So, yeah, guys, that's what I want to kind of say too, guys. When, as it said in the report, anytime you're closing down a priority post, you do have to make your highest level aware. But the sad thing is, when it starts becoming routine, people just start accepting it as the norm, and they no longer want to take the phone calls. But the problem is, you're still operating out of policy. And then there's also certain decisions that are being made that you may think are discretionary because you've been doing it until something goes wrong. And then someone will micromanage you and saying, well, why'd you take from that unit when you should have took from here? So it's always good just to even give the notification and let them know of what unit you're cutting from, because the moment you don't, they'll judge you if something hits the fan, and they'll Monday night quarterback the crap out of it. So again, guys, this is where, those phone calls must happen. And again, it's just to remind them, we're operating out of policy, and never get complacent to this routine. And if you're an officer on the unit and you're under, keep putting that in the books. Keep letting them know that, let your supervisors know, hey, I'm under today, or I'm working 2 areas here, or whatever, however you're affected. Because again, the moment you don't say nothing and something happens is the moment someone's going to turn to you and say, well, you never told me that. Even though it's obvious, you still never told me that you had a concern that you couldn't meet. I don't care if you told me 6 months ago, you didn't tell me today. And that matters. So now the next part, they talk about security lapses. While these staffing shortages, especially at the Hughes unit, may have been a factor in inmate Lopez's ability to escape, they're not an excuse for the multitude of security lapses that occurred in preparing Lopez for transport. TDCJ, like most correctional systems, build multiple redundancies into their practices to ensure that one single failure cannot have catastrophic results. History shows that when serious incidents of this type occur in a correctional setting, it's not a single failure that leads to the incident, but the compilation of multiple failures. That was the case with the Lopez escape. The combination of several inadequate strip searches, failure to search property, poorly applied restraints, and other security shortcuts improved Lopez's probability for successful escape. The fact is that if one of these actions was followed in compliance with existing policy, it is likely that the escape could have been prevented. Russ, what's your thoughts on that? Because that really, I'm sure, hit home with you.
Yeah, if we bring in, the old saying about, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Also, it's not strong at all if we have, multiple weak links in there. Any one of those, they could have prevented this in all likelihood. But instead, we just had, a series of unending, unfortunate I don't want to call them events exactly, but they were just, happenstances where these particular officers fell down on the job. We go back to the root causes of what that could have been with regards to the staffing, where, basically we had, shift triage every single day, deciding, which part of the patient we're going to save, which part of the patient we're going to throw away in our staffing. And then these individuals, perhaps not fully trained, perhaps not fully supervised, perhaps, just tired, perhaps not understanding the gravity of the things that they were kind of slipping on. And then pretty soon it just starts marching all by itself of its own accord toward this horrible end, where he ended up escaping and killing these 5 people. So, like I say, it's all about those links. It's all about, where the vulnerabilities are. It's all about the, those places where he was able to, leverage those negative security impacts.
Yeah, and guys, and when we look at a higher level and we look to investigate these concerns, the first thing we look at are the basics, because that's mostly the first thing that gets affected when it comes to complacent staff. Now, granted, guys, I know we have the facility that's understaffed. So, and when we break down through this report, I want people to realize something. Understaffing isn't a catch-all excuse either. I want people to realize that when shit hits the fan, you could say understaffing, but if they look at it and they really see just a negligent practice, you could point to understaffing all you want. At the end of the day, those are going to be 2 separate concerns. So I want people to be aware of that. And we're going to get deeper in the dialogue too, because we're going to talk about some situations with the bus that I'm going to find to be very interesting when we get into that dialogue. But I want to get into this next part real quick. Lapses appear endemic. TDCJ internal review, as well as other independent assessments, found that staff at the Hughes unit had become complacent and circumvented security procedures in favor of hastily completing responsibilities in a cursory manner. These breakdowns appear to have become routine and a matter of regular practice rather than isolated incidences. Although we did not investigate practices at other TDCJ units, it's possible that the complacency regarding security practices occurring there also. Hey, Russ, I got to give this to you before we move forward because it's about complacency. I said the biggest concern here, guys, and we've said this before, is where we, create practices out of convenience and then they become routine. And the sad thing is we wind up, instead of practicing policy and procedure, we start practicing complacent behaviors and breeding those complacent behaviors are built basically more of convenience. So when you see that part, Russ, and you see them talking about complacency and just basically not following policy and procedure, I know that irks you a bit, correct?
Yeah, it's that thing is it's just kind of an internal rot, if you will, where things start to be put into that complacent mode. First of all, you get that complacency of routine, and complacency of routine is well, not much is happening, not much is going on. We must be doing our jobs, right? Just as an internal dialogue. And so they start slipping. They start, maybe not doing the strip search in the way that they're supposed to. There was a part in this that I caught that apparently they were allowing these individuals to keep their same clothing. So what happens is they pass them the clothing, they pat it down and do all that stuff. Well, that's an opportunity for them to smuggle something on board. And so that's another part where they've become complacent. And then, that just extends on to, the complacency of being tired and understaffed, and the complacency of, hindsight bias, where, just no one has ever found anything on any of these inmates in so long that we expect that we're never going to find anything on these inmates all the way into the future. And that just tends to build on itself. And it's built on a weak foundation, a foundation, made out of sand and water, rather than going back to the building blocks of the basics, where we do basic, good, great searches, where we do, good basic policies, not letting them keep their shoes, not letting them keep their clothes, where they're always put into a position where if they're going to smuggle something, they're going to have to take a bigger chance.
Yeah, guys, when it comes to complacency, and we'll get to Joe, The people that are meant to make sure that we are not complacent are our supervisors. So God forbid our supervisors become complacent. I mean, that's the big thing. Where's the supervisory oversight? So right here, next part is lack of supervisory oversight. Supervisory oversight is key to ensuring staff compliance with preventing staff complacency. However, as noted in TDCJ, serious incident review, supervisory security staff had not been conducting regular inspections or routine rounds. Additionally, we found there's no policy that identifies when, where facility leadership are to conduct rounds and the frequencies of those rounds. Also, existing surveillance systems can be better used to provide oversight, and the Hughes unit has a significant number of remote surveillance cameras, but the ability to review the enormous amount of videos captured on these cameras is difficult and makes it very time-consuming for supervisors to remotely observe staff compliance. Now, Joe, I'm very familiar with these practices. A sergeant may visit the unit twice, a lieutenant may visit once. But now, as you said before, you had a sergeant on a constant watch. He can't do any tours, or she can't do any tours. So what do you mandate for those tours for those supervisors? Let's start with that. And what could stop them from doing their tours outside of negligence or just someone that's not stepping up and doing their job? And we'll get to that. Let's just talk about the ones that are trying to do their job but can't commit to their 2 tours or 1 tour. I don't know what TDCGA holds them to.
Well, when it comes to the tours, we have to visit all the duty posts every day, every shift. So, myself and the sergeants would kind of split that responsibility between the 3 of us. I would take the more severe areas, like our max custody and max custody and our restrictive housing units and areas like that. And they would do your general population, minimum security areas, and the other duty posts like the infirmary and vocational areas, furniture factory, and stuff like that, where they would go out and do all those areas. We literally had to walk the entire unit every day, every shift. Now, of course, when you are so short-staffed that you're utilizing your sergeants on the duty posts, obviously with them being on the roster on the duty post, that kind of negates their responsibility for that day. Therefore, it pretty much all falls on the lieutenant to make all the rounds for that day.
Now, let me ask you a question. If that's the case, this is where it becomes a bit scary, because now your lieutenant is actually working down as a sergeant. So they would be expected to do more tours if the sergeant is not able to do the tours. Would that be correct?
That is correct. I mean, your lieutenant, in essence, becomes the only person available loose. And, they're not only the lieutenant, they're the sergeant at that point as well.
Yeah. And Russ, are you familiar with this as well, with the supervisor mandated tours? What did you guys do? 2 for a sergeant, 1 for a lieutenant, so forth and so on?
Not as much for the lieutenant, but it was really incumbent upon the sergeants to get to each of those areas. My question for Joe is that I see this as kind of a cumulative effect where day after day after day, it's not so much about checking, doing the spot checks as the report put it, but you're also not having the supervisor there in order to train people and advise them of policy, and do all of those other things that's necessary to, instill that good quality corrective practices in there.
Absolutely. 100% agree with you there. And that's exactly what's been taking place over the last year. Your supervisors are so enthralled and so tied up in daily duties because of short staffing that, you don't get to spend that quality time because you're basically hustling. You're getting from one post to the next, trying to get all your paperwork signed, trying to get all your segregation cards signed. You're looking in the cells, doing everything that a lieutenant and a sergeant is supposed to do when you're doing all your spot checks. But yeah, in essence, you're absolutely correct.
I would also think you're also, as a supervisor, managing the gaps, where when you're pulling those priority posts, you're managing the gaps to just try to keep things somewhat operational. So we also talks about TDCJ's response to the incident. TDCJ implemented a multitude of corrective measures outlined in Chapter 6 to address the deficiencies found during their own internal review, and also took the unconventional step of suspending inmate transports for a week and so that it could dedicate its limited resources to review and transportation practices. And bravo for that. I thought that definitely was a great move. CGL fully agrees and supports these corrective actions. The following recommendations would further address the conditions that made the escape of inmate Lopez possible. So these are 19. Let's check them out real quick. I'll go. We'll alternate. So I'll go with Joe first, and I'll go with Russ. But we'll go with Joe first when it comes to recruitment and retention. Underlining many of the TDCJ issues is the lack of staff in the correctional officer's position. TDCJ and the state of Texas must continue their efforts to recruit and retain staff. The recent salary increases for line staff is a positive step. Hey, Joe, I got to ask you a question when it comes to this, though. This has always been a concern. We could try to get staff. I get it. But how much of that do we really have control of, to be honest with you?
We don't. You can throw all the money in the world you want at it. If the people don't feel valued and they don't feel they're part of the mission, part of the team, they're not going to stay. And that's what's happening. If you look back at that slide for the vacancies, the officers just got a 15% raise in April of 2022. So to put things in perspective, a correctional officer 5 is now making what I retired at back in December of 21 as a lieutenant. That's what they're making as a CO5 now. They're making lieutenant's pay. And
do you have the numbers? Did you had something with the specific numbers?
Yeah. Give me just a second. Let me get out of my full screen mode. I got it up on my second tab here.
Yeah, because I remember we were talking about that they did get a raise recently.
Yes.
But I wanted to know, you said it was a 15% raise?
15% raise. It was mandated by the state government here. They actually lobbied and actually got it pushed through as an emergency for the officers. So just as a perspective, entry-level correctional officers are coming in now at $34.72.82 a month. So you're talking about $20.04 an hour to start. Top end, which is a CO5 at 73 plus months of service in the system, is making $42.78.20 a month. So let me put something in perspective in regards to the CO5 pay after the 15% raise. As a lieutenant, I retired at the rate of $41.01 a month. And now CO5s are making more than what I actually retired at.
Hey, Joe, what does that translate to yearly? Just to
yearly for a topped out correctional officer, you're looking at, now there's two different pay scales. Okay. You have a non-maximum unit and a maximum unit. So on the non-maximum unit, their annual salary is $51,338. On a maximum farm, they actually get another 3% on top of that as an incentive to go work in a max custody farm to help fill the vacancies. So their annual salary for working at a max security farm is $52,879. So about $1,500 more a year.
All right. And then I know that the big concern we had, and we've been trying to do shows on this. We did a show yesterday about commitment and starting being connected and then commitment, like it really is beyond the external incentive of pay and benefits. But that really is where it all starts. That really is where people look at first. As much as we want to say the profession's a lot more than that, you're really not going to know that until you step in. So the first incentive really is, what am I going to be paid for doing this job? And the sad thing is, guys, when people ask that, they're contrasting it to the negative at first. Like what am I going to get paid to do this fucking job? And it's like, okay, well, hold on, and at that point, it's like, yeah, we have to step up to invite those. But I will tell you something right now. There are some agencies that pay very well, and they're not getting the numbers either. So it is something about the profession itself. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, if you look, if you go back to that slide where it shows the staffing vacancy statewide, the month of April 2022, when they got the raise, the vacancies actually went up, not down. They went up. So, that in itself tells you the money wasn't the issue.
Oh, yeah, I agree to that. And
You can see right there from December 31st to April 30th. That was after the raise was invoked. The raise was actually put into effect April 1st, and it still went up.
Yeah.
Maintenance.
And I will be honest with you guys. I mean, there is something with, yes, we need more money, but there's also other things that can show appreciation. I think that carries weight too. Like, I think there should be push in recognizing the work that's being done behind the wall, like Joe said, and then partner that with a good substantial raise, because they do connect. Like the money you're paying them tells them what? That we do appreciate your work. We know it's hard work, and therefore this is what you're worth. But when you're not paying them in comparison to other agencies or other law enforcement agencies, then it's like, you know what? Why am I going to do this when I can get a greater respect for doing this? And I think that matters, that greater level of respect. Now, we also have, hey, Russ, this is a good one too. Focus security assessments on search and transport procedures. As TDCJ re-implemented security review process, it should focus these reviews on basic security practices and transportation security. What do you think they're talking about there, Russ?
There's a baseline of a different number of things that you need to do with each and every transport that you take out. Number one, of course, is the search of that inmate. If you can't, make sure that an inmate is 100% free of any contraband, you're taking a huge chance. Many times we've seen across the country, we've seen officers and members of the public lose their lives because somebody smuggled a handcuff key or a weapon or something like that. So it sounds to me like they're really talking about, getting back to the basics, but also focusing on the transportation element itself. You really want that transportation element to not be impacted by the thought of these, running things short. It appears to me in what this particular report said that they were running that transport short, and I can't even imagine such a thing with the number of inmates that they had. And it just seems to me like they were playing Russian roulette with this thing, and they should have known that they were playing Russian roulette. So I know we're going to get to more about the seating in the bus and about what the requirements were for doing a transport like that. But I just think that, things were obviously starting to fall apart. The seams were starting to crack and tear open, and no one bothered to, say, hey, wait a minute, we're about to completely run off the rails at this point.
Yeah. And the next one, and thanks, Russ, because that's we're going to get more detailed into that as we move forward. The review of medical transports with the telemed, UTMB is usually with telemed, for appropriateness. TDCJ has begun efforts to reduce transports to increase telemedicine and expanding on-site services. Telemedicine equipment is reported to be outdated and should be upgraded. Additionally, TDCJ should conduct a data-driven analysis of past medical transports to determine areas where medical appointments could be conducted without transport. I'll cover this one real quick. I'm very familiar with this, actually. So I want people to know something. We don't want to really send inmates out on medical trips if we don't have to. That's really a last resort. That's why we want to have the means within our facilities to handle concerns. Some facilities will have infirmaries. Some facilities actually have actual hospitals. There has to be a good partnership between management and medical management, because medical management, sometimes for them, they want to send inmates out for every little thing. And it's like, guys, you don't realize what it takes to send one inmate out. And that's why telemedicines matter. And I believe that every facility should invest in that. If you don't have a good telemed system, then you're forcing us to take the inmate out for what could be just a regular routine verbal checkup. So telemedicine to me has definitely been a great way to improve the safety and security of any facility, because it limits the transports needed, because again, we could do the telemed here. So again, if you guys are watching this from the outside, not so much TDCJ, but work with your medical, ask them what trips are going out that didn't have to go out and why, because you got to check on that data. I mean, I believe every facility, and then at the higher level, the executive staff are usually going to be keeping numbers keeping account of how many trips are being sent out. And in some cases, they may go at the end of the year and say, hey, the trips went up this year. Why are we going up? What is it that's changing? And you'll find that, a year later, someone's saying, oh, our telemed system went down. Oh, you want to tell us? So, at that point, we could start working on that immediately so we can cut the trips back, but get on that as quick as you can. Telemed is a great help to any facility because it could eliminate a lot of the trips that could just be handled through a video conference call. All right, so that pulls us up to the next spot, which is reorganized, streamlined TDCJ policy structure. Policies function as a rule book for staff conduct and performance and should be clear and easy to understand. TDCJ's policy structure is one of the most complex we have found in any state correctional system, with requirements spread across a significant number of different policy sources. Simply finding a TDCJ policy requirement is an extremely time-intensive and difficult undertaking for any staff or outside consultant. TDCJ should engage in a study to streamline their policy structure, improve their clarity, and elevate those important requirements to require executive director approval. Hey, Joe, I want to touch base with you on this. So I've seen a lot of policies in my time that are actually pretty unique. You read a policy that it says, see this policy for this part, see this policy for that part, instead of just breaking the whole thing down. And at the very end, for a reference, you can go to these policies. I mean, to me, that's just lazy writing. It's like, okay, well, we got to develop this one policy that may incorporate a few policies. So when it touches to the part where these policies connect, just put see that policy. And it's like, no, put everything down. And at the very end of the policy, you can put the references of what policies it took that contributed to this one main policy. And right now, the biggest concern I have with a lot of agencies is this universal precaution to make change, do this collective punishment, and create policies that may not be needed. We're just quick to let's throw something down and basically just, out of, we're so concerned of liability, but then you wind up making an organization more complex because you keep adding layers and layers and layers. When at the end of the day, yes, someone could have messed up. Let's hold them accountable. I get it. But did this really require us, inventing another policy on top of another policy on top of another policy? But in your time, was that becoming a problem? Was that becoming more complex? And
oh yeah, absolutely. Just in the transport policies alone, there was actually 4 separate transport policies in our policy directives. One for general transports. They have one for a transport to a public medical facility. You have one for a public court appearance. And then you had one that went to our prison hospital in Huntsville. So instead of incorporating all these into one transport policy, we have 4 different policies. So yeah, it's definitely becoming a problem. It got to the point where, everything was a knee-jerk reaction. And, okay, make a policy for that. Okay, make a policy for that. Okay, make a policy for that. So you have policies on top of policies on top of policies that all reference the same basic goal that could be accomplished by incorporating them into one policy, a well-written policy. And, I can definitely agree with the CGL auditors on that. TDC has one of the most complex policy systems I've ever seen.
And to be honest with you, that to me is a great find, because that means that they were looking through every policy, and that really, again, this is a very detailed report. So now you got revised security precaution designator policy. So Russ, it says here the security precaution designator policy identifies certain categories of inmates that require enhanced supervision, including those with a past history of escape. The policy should be revised to establish more detail regarding transport requirements for those inmates with an escape history or other factors or circumstances that may indicate an individual has a higher risk of escape. Currently, the policy prescribes only very limited transport implications for inmates with a recent escape. You know what's funny, guys? So I'm a little familiar with this too, real quick, and I'd love to get Russ's thoughts on this. So basically, you're going to have inmates that will be designated as high risk. And usually those inmates that are designated high risk are usually inmates that are in higher level facilities, and they could be designated as high risk because they have escapes within a certain time frame, maybe 5 to 10 years. They could be high risk because of their crime, because of their acts of impulsiveness. The list goes on. They could be a high risk because not only do they pose a threat to the public, but maybe people pose a threat to them. You're taking out a leader of a gang or a notorious child killer or whatever it is. High risk really is just defined by the level of security that's needed to do the transport. And these high risk, believe it or not, should be evaluated quarterly. And when I say evaluated quarterly, we're evaluating to see if the need still exists. And who should be evaluating these? It should be a committee that should consist of a director. It should consist of majors in custody at some level, the administration of the facility in which the inmates are at. You should also have your internal affairs or your investigative division. You should have your classification division because they can tell you if there's any court trips coming up, stuff like that, along with your special operations groups who will be managing most of these trips. But that should be done quarterly. And if there's ever a request for a removal, it has to be approved pretty much unanimous by the whole committee, because I've seen higher level people, if they go to make a request to remove in just one department, let's say the internal affairs division is like, yeah, we're not ready for that removal. We do believe that the person, could still try to facilitate an escape or whatnot. Then we'll hold them off, move them on to the next meeting, and then keep it moving. But Russ, what's your thoughts on the procedure of that when you come to designating people as high risk? What are we looking at, and how should that be reviewed?
So first of all, I think that, every single inmate has to be reviewed for what their potential is, for what their motivation is, and for what their potential resources are to carry something like that out. There are inmates that are really crafty at designing and making stuff and fashioning weapons and carrying weapons on them in manners where they can't be detected. Or at least not detected easily, and so naturally, that's one thing we want to look at. Another part of that, of course, is what you already brought up, which was being part of a security threat group, aka gang, because that increases the possibility that they can use outside resources to help them in that manner, and it could be everything from supplying cash. To actually, having an external escape attempt try and break them out. So all of those things need to be looked at. And in one of my concerns in seeing this, though, is this individual was part of a known gang, the Mexican Mafia, which we have a lot of them here in California, and they don't have any problem killing anybody. Now, in this case, it turned out that apparently he wasn't helped, or if they were going to help him, they bailed out or whatever. But in my mind, a guy with that connection just to that gang alone should have been at the minimum a 2-on-1 or a 3-on-1 transport, and not part of a big clutch of prisoners all inside a bus with an undermanned, understaffed transport team.
Yeah, we're definitely going to break into how that vehicle looks and, what the specific concerns were that day. And guys, another thing I want people to realize too, when you're on that committee and you're reviewing it, one of the questions you're going to have to answer is when's their next court trip, and then also how have they been on the most recent trips. And I'll be honest with you, if the person hasn't been on a recent trip for a while, but maybe they have one coming up, I would not remove them. I would you want to lean on how they are on those trips. To us, that makes, that holds the most weight. And the biggest resources we have on those committees are the custody's perspective, the IA's perspective, and the special operations group. I mean, they matter because they're more on the tactical side of handling it. And then our level is more of the administrative side, just to make sure that we're all aware that this inmate's high risk, and we're all sit together, and from the executive side, we just validate that decision in case it's ever challenged.
Hey, Anthony, real quick, if I can, I'd like to give a little bit of background on the security precaution designators. First off, let me just, because I know things work different in different states. Internal affairs in our state has nothing to do with classification. They have no say whatsoever in any kind of offender's classification, where he goes, where he doesn't go, unless it's for a criminal investigative purpose only, if they're looking to file charges or, he's a complainant. Now, when it comes to security precaution designators, this was devised in the state of Texas somewhere around 2001, 2002. Don't know if you guys were familiar with it. The Texas 7 that escaped from the McConnell unit, where Officer Aubrey Hawkins up at Dallas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Dallas PD, was killed by one of these escaping inmates. He shot him and killed him. And as a result, a manhunt ensued. They got everybody back into custody. One of them committed suicide. And the last two were captured in Colorado, I believe. Anyways, they constituted the security precaution designators as a result of, they looked at the classification plan, and you had people that were in jobs that should have never been in jobs. Most of these guys were serving life sentences, and they were walking around as trustees because they had 10 years done on a sentence of a life sentence. So when they revamped the classification plan, they came up with what they call the security precaution designator. And the security precaution designator covers escapes either from county jails, juvenile facilities, walkaways. Yep, that's them. Walkaways from halfway houses, things of that nature. So there's different levels of escape histories. Okay. On top of that, we have security precaution designators for those who can defeat mechanical doors, who are staff assaultive, who can defeat hand restraints. So when they revamped, like I said, when they revamped the classification plan, they came up with these security precaution designators, and that's kind of where all this led to up to this guy. Now, Offender Lopez, and I don't know if we've discussed his custody level at the time of this escape. He was considered a 1A inmate. In Texas, you have G1 through G5, which is your trustee through maximum custody. Then you have 1A, 2A, 3A. And your 1A, 2A, 3A is reserved, is beyond max custody, worse than max custody, because he's either staff assaultive, offender assaultive, been convicted of having a weapon. So this guy, this guy's custody level was pretty damn serious. And what they, one thing that they did determine in the report and was later found through the investigation after interviewing some of the offenders on that bus, was the fact that he had been purposely trying to, he purposely had medical shipping him different places because he was learning the routine of the officers, both on the unit and the transport bus.
Yeah, let me get back. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, and by the way, see, that's the information I feel that no one even knows to ask. You know what I mean? That's the information. That's why we're doing the show. Because right now, if you leave that in the hands of sometimes the media, they don't know to ask these things because they're not familiar with the practices or the policies that govern what we do. Now, we also have, let me get us back to here as we move forward. It says the pilot policy requirement modifications that consider current staff shortages. I've kind of discussed staff shortages already, but developing corrective action to the escape that load more work on already overtaxed staff can result in further failures. Given the low staff levels, correctional officers are often required to perform the policy requirements of multiple positions. TDCJ must ask, are these policy requirements impossible to achieve? Given the current staffing crisis, in certain circumstances, we found this to be the case, and it likely contributes to staff taking security shortcuts. TDCJ should consider piloting the reduction of some of those requirements to a more reasonable level during the current staffing shortage. So I do have a concern with that. I get that we're under, and I get that people will take shortcuts out of convenience. But the sad thing is, some of the stuff that they'll cut are going to be those searches.
Well, I don't necessarily think that they're trying to implement them to cut it out. I think they're telling them to bring it down to a more manageable level. Most people that are assigned to post are required to do at least 3 cell searches per shift. And when you're looking at the possibility of being the only rover for 15 different areas in 8 hours, there's no way in hell you're going to get that many searches done. So I think what they're asking in that instance is that they're asking to cut it down to a more manageable level.
Right. So I definitely agree with you 100%. But my concern is if you start doing that, does that become the norm? Like, I mean, this could be something memo, but the policy shouldn't change, because at the end of the day, our momentum always has to be to go back to that operations. You know, what normal operations are.
I kind of look at it from this standpoint. You know, when you're having mass movements to and from the chow hall, to and from education, and you're standing out there on the sidewalk, you're not necessarily pat searching every single offender. You're doing randoms because you want to catch them off guard. So, you know, as far as cell searches, why not do it in that fashion too?
No, I get it. You know, I get it.
Because if you start doing too many cell searches, you know, like in Texas, what they were doing, they were logging them, you know, and instead of mixing it up, they were going sequentially.
Yeah,
cell
so
1, cell 3. So everybody knew who was next.
My always biggest concern when it comes to this, though, is that I mean, granted, we have to, we're in desperation mode. I get it. But once we start managing a facility that way and people see it as being successful, that could wind up being the norm when it was never meant to be the norm. We were always in survival mode. So, right. I mean, I get what you're saying 100%, but my biggest concern is going to be is that, you know, this winds up becoming the norm. And then now all of a sudden, you know, when we still need, let's say 24,000 as our main number, we're able to operate normally at 18 or 17,000 because now we're managing the facility in this manner, and now that's seen as successful. And the funny thing is the people at top, they will see that as being successful, and then that becomes the routine norm. But what's your thoughts on that?
And that's what led to this.
Yeah, what's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Absolutely. When you're operating under crisis mode all the time, the emergency manual should be that thing that you dust off every now and then when you have, a really big incident or something like that. It shouldn't be the thing that supplants what you're going to and just, push the rest of your department operational manual aside and go straight to this and go, okay, we can cut all of these things and we can operate on a bare bones minimum forever into perpetuity. It's not designed to be that way. We need to keep in mind what a well-run unit should look like, fully staffed, and that should be what our goal is. And unfortunately, they've just made it harder and harder and harder to achieve that. What the actual solution is, I'm not sure of. But I think that they need to start taking a look at, getting some of those people, up in the higher positions out there helping, working some shifts and starting to understand what the actual problems are. Because if you don't know what the actual problem is, you'll never figure out what an actual solution is.
I love that. That's spot on too, Russ. I mean, that technically is the key. I mean, we usually go after symptoms, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really solve the problem. See if we could speed through some of this. Reinforced policy concerning the prior notice of transports. It was discovered that inmates are routinely provided advance notice of the date of their upcoming transport. The executive director should issue an order of all employees and contractors reinforcing that inmates are not to be given advance notice of the date, time of future transports. Policy should also reflect this requirement. Yeah, let's not skip over that because
why were they doing that? Do we know?
Well, I want to add something on that, Russ. So that first off, by the way, I know some medical departments that have done that, or sometimes the family and their effort, like the emergency contact and their effort to find, hey, when is my son's next medical appointment? And someone winds up sneaking out and telling them when that date is, and the inmate's now aware of when that date is, so they're ready for the transport. High no. I mean, if that's being done, that needs to be nipped ASAP. And Joe, was that part of the routine? I mean, were people doing that? Are you muted, Joe? I think you're muted.
I'm muted. Sorry, we got a bad thunderstorm here and I sprung a leak. Yeah, that's a yes or no question. We were telling them, not to tell them, but at the same time, the chain bus leaves at 3 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, we got to pack the property the night before and inventory it. And generally, medical notifies the offenders of their appointments and when they're going to be. So they go back to the dorm housing areas. They pick up the phone and get on inmate.com, and they tell their families. A lot of it's not within security's control. That's typically medical that's letting them know, hey, we're going to send you to the hospital Galveston on this day, or we're going to send you here on this day. So what do they do? They go back and they pick up the phone and, hey, baby mama, if you don't hear from me for 2 days, it's because I'm going here.
Well, sometimes we tell, like, if there's a medical trip, let's say going out the next day, we usually would tell, let's say, the ladder shift officer, when everything gets locked down and the inmate is locked down, they can't get the phones, they can't get to nothing. Hopefully, they don't have a phone. You tell the inmate, hey, start packing your stuff. You need an emergency bag, whatever it is, and be ready for the morning. I mean, because that's going to limit the contact. But the only concern is going to be is that, if there is an issue or they're trying to plan something, again, the next day, they're not the only one that has access to a phone that can call their family members, sad to say. Even though we have that list, there's still always people that find their way to connect to each other. And so I think that being in the habit of, if you are going to send them out, guys, do not give them any notice when they're able to still get back to that phone and communicate that they have a transport the next day. And I'm sure, Russ, you would agree with that 100%. Is there anything else you want to explore there, or should we move on to the next part?
No, I just want to say that it's tough, because you never know who's going to be making that call. We had death row full of telephones for these guys, and we'd come in there to do a transport and go out with the guy. Everyone saw us leave. Everyone had some idea. He's gone out 5 times in the past for someone to look at a bunion on his toe or something, and they could call anybody. And so there's no easy solution, but you have to stay on top of it. You have to try and mitigate it some way.
And the biggest concern, guys, is if that inmate is able to play a medical staff person. That's going to be a big concern. Now we got, let's see. I like this. Establish a duty warden inspection schedule. Best practices support establishing requirements for wardens, assistant wardens, and majors at each facility conduct scheduled and unscheduled rounds and personally visit all areas of the facility. No current TDCA policy exists. We note that administrative staff did appear to be making regular rounds at the Hughes unit, but these rounds were at their own discretion and were not documented. So when it comes to administration, I can answer this one, and we can move forward if you guys want. Administration should at least do weekly rounds in their areas of authority or areas of control, because you may have multiple people working in administration, and it breaks down the facility a little bit. So everybody could go to their designated area at least once a week, interact with the population, interact with the staff. Usually when the administration's walking around, they do have the highest level of custody with them, so they can go ahead and just if administration has any concerns, yes, they could speak to the officers, definitely, but also it's still good to sometimes go through that chain of command as well, because some stuff may need immediate correction. Like if I see an officer without a vest, I'm going to give that to the major that's next to me. If I see, if I want to talk to an officer about, hey, what's going on with your day? That's a lot different. Hey, what do you got going on? But if I see an officer doing something they shouldn't be doing, I'm not going to talk directly to that officer at that point. I'm going to give it to the major and then let them handle the concern. And I'll move forward. That's their department. Let them handle it. But the weekly reviews or the weekly tours matters. One keeps connection, but also lets you kind of understand what the temperature is, what's going on. And, and the funny thing is, this is probably not mentioned here, but I will tell you one thing. For administration to walk around and be on notice is impossible. So when administration walks around, they're seeing the facility operate at the best of operations because they're being announced, as they're coming down. So, I mean, You know, and you don't want to be sneaky with it either. I was never a big fan of that either. But having said that, you can only see what's being shown to you. So, you know, that's another concern. So this is just more for interacting. If there's any concerns, to go ahead and, you know, see if you can help your staff, and then also engaging with the population as well. But not in a way for them to circumvent their officers. I just want to make sure I put that out there. That's just more of a follow-up. This is the director inspection. So same thing. You know, the director should establish a policy requiring region directors. Looks like quarterly inspections. The set of inspections for the regional directors will be, policy should require that regional directors and staff conduct periodic formal inspections of their unit each quarter unless a security order is being conducted that quarter. These formal inspections should focus on vulnerability and policy compliance and use an instrument that can be regularly adjusted to meet the primary concerns of agency leadership. Conduct a desk audit. This one I thought was good. The workload analysis of warden position. Over the years, an increasing number of administrative duties have been added to TDCJ wardens. These duties appear to require more and more time behind a desk, reducing the valuable time they have in their facilities. TDCJ should audit warden workloads and make changes necessary to maximize their ability to be present in key areas of the facility and observe inmates and staff. Guys, I stand by that 100%. Sometimes it could be very busy. You're getting emails like crazy, and even when you leave to go walk around, you're still stressed out because you know you're going to come back to 20 million emails. So I like that idea. I think that was very keen from CGL to realize that you could have a warden that wants to walk down, but the moment I walk down, I'm getting flooded, or I'm the only person that can answer this. So I have to be up here. I have to sign this paperwork. I have to get things moving. So understanding what those workloads are would help management, because the sad thing is, guys, is when the person is overwhelmed with workload, people become secondary. It's true. People become secondary. So the sad thing is we're stuck at our desk because the moment we leave that desk, emails are coming. So let's get to the next part. This is where it gets pretty good. This is where it gets to the trucks, the transports. Reconfigure transport buses to improve security. So I want to get both your opinions on this. I'll start with Russ first. But it says, let's start with let's break this down because this is a really big part of what our discussion is. But the transport buses are equipped with three staff seats and 2 compartments. So for the staff seats, you got the driver's seat, the rear compartment officer seat, and the third officer seat. Let me get this screenshot in. Let me get that in there. So you have the driver's seat, the rear compartment officer seat, and the third officer seat. So let's start with that first. So Russ, if you have 3 seats, I mean, how should these officers be situated?
So you know, by looking at the way this one is, first of all, I think people need to understand that the driver is there to drive. You know, he is of little to no use as far as trying to observe what's going on back there. Everything that's being observed has to come from that front officer, where it lists on this particular diagram that seat was not filled, right? And then you go back and you look at the rear compartment where you have that officer, and his view is limited because he's looking over the top of all of that general population compartment. So that's a particular problem right there. The fact that they didn't have enough people to fill that bus to its max. The other thing, of course, that, you know, went on that Joe was telling us about was the level of this one inmate. The level of that one inmate, in my mind, you know, required him to have you know, not being transported with other inmates. I would have not run that particular transport like that, just even because of his association with the Mexican mafia. Go ahead, Joe.
With that inmate in particular, if he was taken to a free world hospital by himself, it would have required 2 officers and a supervisor.
Yeah.
By policy, by our own policy, if he was being taken to a free world hospital in an agency van, or if he went by ambulance, it requires 2 officers and a supervisor just because of his custody level.
Yeah,
guys,
see, I would have if I was planning this out, and I'm by no means in charge of Texas Department of Correction stuff, but if they were going to transport someone of that high level on a bus like this, which I would never want to do, at the very minimum, you want all three of those seats there, and you want a chase car. Is my belief the way it should have been run.
and guys, let me ask you guys a question here, real quick, out of curiosity here. So, you got the compartments, you got the restrictive housing compartment, the general population compartment, and then the recommendations, real quick, was from the CGL: turn third officer seat to face the main compartment. Currently, the seat faces forward, directing the officer's vision away from the inmate compartments. And then it says relocate the restrictive housing compartment to the back of the bus. This is where I want to discuss it. And TDCJ should consider placing the less controlled population, general population, at the front of the bus, and more controlled restrictive housing in back, in closer proximity to the rear compartment officer and further away from the driver. So here's my two questions. I'll start with Joe first. Why are we putting general population and restrictive housings on the same bus to begin with?
Because of mass transportations to and from doctor's appointments. You have two different bus routes. One is for medical, and one is for what they call routine transports to and from units, new units of assignments and what have you. That is the reason why that they're putting general population and restrictive housing offenders on the same bus. Now, and on top of that, inside there, if you have an offender who's offender protection investigation, there's a possibility he could be on that bus too.
Yes, I'm not a big fan of having different levels of custody on the bus. Now, don't get me wrong. Rule of thumb is anytime an inmate's out of the facility, no matter what their status is in the facility, they are max inmates outside. Like you kind of take those precautions. But these inmates are not max; they're close custody inmates. These inmates are a lot different than the general population, and I'm not really used to having a bus with those two different statuses on the same bus. Russ, would you agree with that, Russ, or do you think that it's okay to have them both on the same bus?
I believe it's just another one of those things that we see about, we're trying to, cut corners and maximize efficiency. Sometimes maximizing efficiency is not a good idea, at the expense of safety. As a matter of fact, I'll say all the time, it's not a good idea at the expense of safety. In those restrictive housing compartments, though, on this particular bus, I would always want to be, taking fewer inmates out of that kind. It looks to me like, that they're just trying to look at it kind of like the airline looks at it. How many seats can we squeeze in? So,
would you consider this one of the things we talked about earlier, where it's more of a convenient practice at the higher level, though? Like I'm talking about the higher level agency accepting this because it's become a more convenient practice to put them both on the same bus or transport.
Yep, because of the fact that otherwise you would have to have 3 officers just to transport one offender.
And right now, you guys,
if you were taking him by himself, it would require 3 people, 2 COs and a sergeant or above, to transport that same offender anywhere he goes. And with the staffing shortage, they don't have those kind of bodies laying around because they pulled the 3rd officer off of most of these chain buses to work a unit.
Yeah, because I know that obviously staffing, we can't meet the need, because that to me leads to this other question that I have a concern with. Because if we were able to meet the need of these transports, this next question wouldn't even exist, which would be, where should those restrictive housing inmates be, to the front or back of the bus? So I'm very curious what your thoughts are. I'll go with Russ first and then Joe. But Joe, Russ, your opinion first. Where do you? I can't.
Okay,
it's tough for me to.
If we have to do it this way, I want the restrictive housing at the front.
Yeah.
My theory on that is that number one, when you only have one element at the back, which is that one officer, The old saying that I go by is, one is none, two is one, and three is key. Well, at least if you have them up toward the front, there's a possibility that, two officers are not going to be taken out at the same time. Also, that guy at the back, what if he experiences a heart attack, or what if an inmate is able to get through that and get to him? If they're up at the front, those two officers, both of them have weapons. The inmates that you're going to end up having to shoot are going to be closer in that respect. And you also have the ability of one weapon to cover the other weapon at that close proximity there. So that's the way that I look at it. Also, I know that the driver is, not going to be, prime on being able to look at things and stuff, but still, no matter how much he's diminished in that capacity, two sets of eyes are better than one.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? I couldn't explain that first, but when I read that and I saw that suggestion, it didn't sit right with me. I said I would want the restrictive housing inmates closer to the front as opposed to the back, but it just didn't feel right. And maybe that was my experience talking, but as you said it, Russ, I agree with that. But Joe, how do you see it, Joe, from your perspective?
Now, see, yeah, unfortunately, I'm complete opposite of your guys because, number one, you got plexiglass right behind those two seats that may or may not be clear enough for vision for the bus driver to be able to actually see behind him and what's going on. And then these, the restrictive housing compartment cages are solid black. So that in itself also hinders the visibility of inside these compartments. And for me, I'd rather have them at the back of the bus in a more controlled environment where the officer that's in the back can have direct visual over them, because you're not going to have nowhere near the number of restrictive housing inmates that you're going to have for general population. And in the event that something happens on that bus, that there's a bus fire of some sort, you have a better chance of getting the mass group of general population offenders out first off the bus, and then you can deal with the restrictive housing offenders one by one by one.
I was actually thinking that just now.
So, it's
I know, but
two evils.
To be honest with you, it shouldn't be a question that's asked. They should not. I don't feel like they should be in the same vehicle together. I don't. I mean, they're different statuses. I'm not used to seeing them in the same vehicle. So I think the question itself is just born from a situation that is built out of convenience, and now we're trying to figure out what works best. But to be honest with you,
also those cages were placed in there not just for restrictive housing inmates, per se, ad seg inmates, but also for the protection of those who are still under an offender protection investigation. One that hasn't been substantiated, unsubstantiated. They're still going through the process of the investigation phase. So that also keeps them separated from the general population inmates, so nobody can get to them.
Yeah, but that's just another reason though that they shouldn't be there in the first place. I see Joe's view on that too, and I think the fact that we got some people here with some experience and we're split on it just goes back to what Anthony said about, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this at all.
Yeah, I just don't think it's ideal. I don't. I mean, maybe we get used to it and maybe we don't see it as something wrong, but I'm not used to this practice. If I have high level inmates, they're not traveling with GP inmates at any time. I don't know. I'm not used to seeing that together, but we'll move on.
Again, you also got, like I was telling somebody on one of the, I think it was on one of the threads on Facebook, another thing to keep in mind too, is you gotta think Texas has 98 prison facilities. And each one of those has restrictive housing offenders of some sort, either, pre-hearing detention, OPI investigations. Each unit has some sort of restrictive housing. So if you combine that from 98 units statewide, that's a lot of offenders. And like I said, you're talking about having to send 3 officers just for one offender that doesn't get on that chain bus.
Well, As I said, I mean, there's nothing ideal in this situation, but I still think that it's definitely something that has to be revisited. I mean, I'm not a big fan of putting them on the same bus.
One of the factors that came up was the fact that, like I said earlier, this guy was, repeatedly getting medical appointments on purpose just so he can see the practices of the bosses on the unit. So, maybe
if you have a guy, let me ask you a question real quick. If you have a guy that's designated as high risk, he should not be on a bus with GP inmates. He's a high risk inmate. He requires, to be honest, I know it's crazy, but he if he's high risk, he technically should be, if it's possible, by himself, because all the energy has to go to that one individual. Because you have some RHU inmates that may not be high risk. Let's just do it that way.
Right.
But when you're a high risk, that energy has to go to that individual. That's why the person is designated as a high risk. So yeah, okay. So we know some information. We know he's high risk. But let's just put him here on this bus with our GP inmates and everything else, because at that point your attention's diverted. I got 80 other inmates on here, and but my main focus has to be this one. And here's the funny thing: it can go two ways. I can't focus on the one because I got to focus on the 80, or because I've been so focused on the what's the adverse? If I can't focus on the one, I got to focus on the 80, or if I can't focus on the 80 because I'm only focused on the one. I just think that the high risk label, you put that label on there, part of that high risk should be, if it's approved, that the person travels alone. That's just, but we'll get to the next part. Let me see. So require random review of strip searches, common sense. Failure to adequately perform a strip search was a major contributor to Lopez Escape. We'll get to that in a little bit. Random video reviews of strip searches by supervisors will provide a better understanding of compliance with the policy. This may require expanding the number of video surveillance staff through the use of qualified volunteers or others, and improving the documentation of when strip searches occur. Just make sure they're aligned with PREA, because some of that stuff I think may not be in total alignment with PREA. But inspect integrity of restricted housing unit cells. This is important. I'll start with Russ and then Joe. During our tour of inmate Lopez's cell in the Hughes unit, we found gaps between the walls and plumbing chase, which could have allowed for the storage or transfer of contraband. A documented inspection of every cell in restrictive housing units should be immediately conducted. Now, think about what we just said. We're understaffed, right? We're cutting back on some of our searches because we don't have enough staffing. That's one thing. Also, when you have inmates that are not even just restrictive housing, but just long-term inmates that live in the same cell for many years, we should start moving them around a little bit. Switch their cells around. They don't always have to be in the same cell for 6. I mean, there's sometimes you're in a prison, the guy's been in the same cell for 24, 25 years, and I think, maybe we should start moving them around because, again, they could be developing ways to get that contraband in. So let's shake them up a little bit. But Russ, what's your thought when you're doing a round and you're checking those cells? I mean, especially for something like contraband or planning escape, what are you looking for?
Well, these guys, they're really, really crafty. So the first thing that you have to take under account, especially if you're doing, just a really isolated cell search is you have to look at items that you would normally, ignore, like potentially, the seats and the struts that hold the seats up for their little desk in there. And, any little gap and, the little bit of, caulking that may go around the window, they can find ways sometimes to mimic that with some toothpaste and a little bit of pigmentation. So you really have to have time if you want to do really good, thorough cell searches. And so, like when Joe's talking about, hey, knocking out 3, man, I'd be lucky to knock out 1 in the way that I do it. So those things are important where they're talking about, cracks or fissures and gaps in the walls or with the windows or with especially, that security door. I can't tell you the number of weapons that I've taken out of the actual inside of a security door. So all those things, tend to indicate that, yeah, he was probably successfully storing different types of weapons, different types of contraband. Who knows what was in there, and who knows, how quickly they got back to that cell before some of the items he may have had stored there may have made their way off all over again.
What's your thoughts on that, Joe? Anything or?
Oh yeah, I mean, we're supposed to be, testing the doors for integrity, looking at any kind of mesh screening, whether it's a vent, a window, looking at the integrity of it, and also in accordance with our own restrictive housing policy, we're supposed to be searching every cell within restrictive housing at least once every 72 hours. So, in accordance with our own policy, again, we didn't follow it, so that should have been something that should have been caught.
Now, Joe, when you find defects like that in a cell, do you guys red tag them and no one can go in there until those are fixed? Or
if it's something especially with the security door, if it's a tampered security door, we red tag that cell and it does not come back online until it's cleared by maintenance and the senior warden. So, at that point, we'll go ahead and strip search him out, supposed to strip search him out and then cuff him up and then bring him out and, move him to another cell, and we'll red tag that cell until maintenance. And a lot of times because of the security doors, a lot of these newer units they're electronic doors. It's not a key or a crank door. A lot of these are electronic doors. So when they're tampered with, we have to bring them down. Maintenance has to come in, doesn't matter what time of the day or night it is. They have to come in and rectify that cell, and it can't be used by classification or anybody else until it's cleared by maintenance and that senior warden.
Give me I got you.
You got me. Yeah. Those inmates always have a habit of knocking those doors off the track.
Yeah.
Maybe banging against it or whatnot, or sometimes they just malfunction. Sometimes they
stuff paper in the tracks. They stuff paper, in the hinges or in the lock mechanism itself.
Dominoes.
Yeah, dominoes. Sometimes they just don't even do the local control point, the panels. Sometimes the panels don't register or work. And I'll be honest with you guys, those lights on those panels
are junk.
Green, red, they're junk. So always don't rely on those to let you know if the door is secured or not. Make sure you're physically checking. I have an idea, guys. So as we finish up these questions, I'm gonna skim all the way down to the actual event, and then that will be good to complete the full breakdown, because we don't need to do the background of TDCJ. We don't need to do the background of this inmate that escaped. We're more talking about the situations that occurred, because believe it or not, if it wasn't Gonzalo-Lopez, it could have been someone else anyway. He just took advantage. He took advantage of vulnerabilities. That's what he did. So absolutely. This matters too. These 19 points were very well written. This is good. This is the prohibit inmates from retaining personal property on transport. Any inmate property should be limited and carried either in a chase vehicle or secure area of the transport vehicle that does not hinder sight lines or limit the amount of property inmates can take on a medical trip. I want to ask you a question, Joe, on this.
Sure.
Obviously, the bulk of inmates' property. This is just if the inmate has property, it could be an overnight bag. He's not living there. He's just going to take a visit. That's if he had property. But the overnight bag, even the bulk property, whatever it is. But the inmate, do you guys have the inmate hold the overnight bag, or do you put the overnight bag maybe under the bus or something away from the inmate so they don't have direct access to their property when they're on the bus, even if it's a simple?
Yeah, they're actually supposed to be putting them underneath the buses, and their overnight bag is only supposed to consist of current KOP medication if they have a blister pack of meds, hygiene, current and pending legal work in a court of law. Again, current and pending legal work, and a pair of shower slides. That's it. That's all they're supposed to be taking with them. So I don't know how or why this guy had a full bag of property with him for a medical appointment.
Well, that's funny. Is that the case? Did he have a full bag of
Yes, he had a full bag of property. You can see it if you look in the CGA. You look in the CGL report. You see the picture. You actually physically see the picture of the sergeant with his property bag. It's supposed to be a red chain property bag with just hygiene, KOP medication, in current legal work.
Yeah,
And he had a full bag of property, and that bag should have never made it on that bus. That bag was supposed to be inventoried, other than what he's allowed to keep for the medical appointment when he goes to it. Everything else is supposed to be inventoried and placed in the offender property room, which he would get back upon his return to the unit.
Yeah, and I didn't know that. I mean, I guess we'll go through it, but I didn't. Where was that mentioned that he had his full bag? Is that mentioned in the report? Because I didn't see that.
Yeah, it's mentioned in the CGL report.
Oh,
if you look,
it's further down.
Yeah, it's further in. If you look, once you get down to the nitty gritty of it, you'll see there's a couple of pictures in there.
And see, the funny thing about that, yeah, we're going to definitely show that. The funny thing about that all that we just said is that is such a practice that we should not be doing, that shouldn't even be a thought that the CGL needs to come up with. Because sometimes when we're looking at these things, we're thinking like, wow, how stupid can you be? Not to be an ass, just being honest, guys, this is a serious thing here. And you're thinking like, well, how stupid can you be? And then you have to read it and they have to post that thing up, because then it's like, well, they posted it up for a reason, Gangi. It's because somewhere along the line, they allowed this inmate to have this whole bag of property. Again, to me, it's basic. And guys, by the way, this is, as we talked about before, the failure of the basics is really what kills us here. Like, because I wouldn't even think, you want to hear something funny? The basics are the things that we assume are happening. So sometimes we don't really check so much on the basics, scary to say, because we assume it's happening because it's corrections 101. And then when it's not happening, you're like, oh, what the, like, you're just blown it blows you away. And then someone goes, well, did you know they were not doing that? To be honest with you, man, it's so basic. I assume they were. You know, now when you go through this whole thing, you have to revamp everything and bring everybody back to the basics. Because if they're not doing this at this most simplistic level, how do you expect them to handle the higher level stuff? So here's the funny thing, Russ. I love your thoughts on this, Russ. This failure at a most basic level, how do you expect them, these same people that are failing at this so basic level, handle a high risk transport?
Exactly. I mean, what is their level of competency? You know, the level of competency that they should be at is they should be able to safely transport that guy, and they should never have any problems out of him that are caused by any kind of contraband that he has on him whatsoever. Everything else is a given, that sometimes these guys are going to act up, sometimes they're going to try and escape, sometimes they're going to try and kill you. All right. I mean, I've done enough high risk transports that I knew that inmate was going to try and kill me if he got the chance. So I made sure that, you know, he never got the chance. I think, you know, one of the things that I can't remember if it was Joe that I had mentioned to this before, but when I first heard about this, I kind of overlooked, you know, all of the stuff that was maybe going on with the searches and stuff like that, because none of that was out in the open yet, of course. But I assumed that, you know, somebody had got in there and planted this stuff inside the bus. And so that was my big concern is, you know, how did someone get to this bus? Was it a you know, an inmate crew that was there to clean it out or whatever? Was it someone that came from outside the grounds? Was it a staff member? And instead, we go back to Occam's razor, and it's the simplest explanation. They just, you know, screwed up on the search. And what does that tell you? This guy was watching. He knew how they were going to act. He knew how they were going to search. And he had probably talked to other people at different parts that were going to be, you know, along the way. And sure enough, you know, he made sure that he was able to exploit that security risk.
Yeah. You know, and here was another critical failure. Not only did they not search him, they didn't use a boss chair for any kind of metal detection on his body. They would have found that handcuff key in his mouth. They took him out to the bus, secured him in the bus, and left him unattended for 30 minutes while they went back and got the other group of offenders.
Well, see, but now, Joe, that's kind of touches on what I was just talking about. The point, he's a high risk. He requires eyes on him all the time. That would be like, you know what? Can I consider a little bit of a metaphor here, but having a constant direct observation where it's one officer watching 12 inmates. You can't do it. I can't watch every inmate constantly. So I think that kind of falls in a line where, of course, they're going to be distracted because at that point, he's placed, he's secured. Let me go focus on the rest of the GP now that I got to get in. I love this finding here. This is one of my favorite findings, actually. The enhanced publication review notification practices. TDCJ internal review found that prior to his escape, inmate Lopez had ordered several publications regarding survival techniques, weapon manufacturing, and manipulation that should have raised concerns about his future intentions. These books were shipped to the facility and appropriately denied upon review by mailroom staff. However, facility administrators were not made aware of these publications. There's no policy requirement for supervisory notification. If this notification had been made, it's possible Lopez's security supervision may have been amplified and his method of transport altered. Now, I'll tell you something right now with this. We're always in communication. Anytime there's a publication that's banned or a publication that was sent to somebody, if it's not already on the ban list, the mailroom supervisor will then forward it up to us or forward it up to the publication review committee, whatever they're actually called. So the word will get out that this person is trying to get a magazine that's a little bit funny. Now, I know our officers, the people I work with, once they start seeing these patterns, they would probably either let their area supervisor know or let us know as administration. And then what we do is we reach out to the internal affairs division. And if the inmate's not already on a mail watch, they will be put on a mail watch. And then I guess it's more of a context. Okay, you're getting this book. What else are you getting? And then if worse comes to worse, I'll tell you something right now. If the person's getting a collection of those books, I would go as far as putting the inmate on administrative housing temporarily until this could be investigated and literally find out why you're getting these books. So and by the way, I'm also going to remove them from the cell. I'm going to shake them up. I'm going to shake them up a little bit, but I love that find. I think that's a very, very important find because that is definitely a preventive measure. And I'm sure you guys would agree with that, correct?
Oh yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. If I go back to, the things that we find out that we should have taken action on, if somebody had known, if I go back to, August the 1st, 1971 at San Quentin, they had people that were visiting in there that had like a 3-year-old kid who had a fake gun strapped to his legs. And one of the officers caught it, and that information was never forwarded up the chain. And of course, 20 days later, on August 21st, 1971, Black August occurred, where 3 correctional personnel were killed inside of the adjustment center there. If someone had been paying attention, it might have stopped right there, but as we know, it didn't.
Now, let's do this too. Let me see. I have another question that's interesting here.
I'll be right back.
Okay, that's fine. Let me get here, Joe. He'll be right back. So this is interesting here, Russ. Eliminate multiple security rosters at correctional facilities. The existing practice of running multiple separate turnout rosters at each facility can result in more critical posts being left unfilled in favor of less critical posts. Lopez was housed in a restrictive housing unit, a Hughes unit. The Hughes unit has 2 primary rosters, general population and restrictive housing, on each shift. And these rosters are siloed, and staff were not shared across them to ensure the most critical posts were filled. We found that on these shifts prior to Lopez's escape, the general population roster were better staffed than restrictive housing rosters. This left critical high priority risk housing posts unfulfilled. I think what I'm getting out of that, Russ, and tell me if this is true, is that I guess the facility kind of has different houses, if you will, that may operate independently of each other. So restorative housing may operate from a different manpower pool than general population. And I have a feeling that, and I get it, but it's still one house. So what you want to do is you want to try to put a roster that balances it and not just focuses on one it's not compartmentalized. Is that what they're trying to say here?
Yeah, it sounds like that's it. Although I have a concern about the way that they're talking about it, is that in some of those more restrictive housing units, the amount of manpower that you need, except for things like for instance, a meal or something like that, usually it kind of runs itself, unless you're doing a lot of escorts or something like that, because they tend to have a lot of downtime because those inmates tend to be inside their cells a lot. When you're talking about what's going on in a less restrictive housing unit, a general population type of situation, is you have a lot of movement, and that movement can be troublesome. You can end up with riots. Those inmates have a lot more access to each other and to staff. So I'm not exactly sure I'm buying onto that you should sacrifice general population for getting individuals more involved with the more restrictive housing, except to say that maybe yes for the searches and things like that, but robbing Peter to pay Paul always seems like a bad idea. It could have just as easily gone the other way. It just happened that this guy was in a more restrictive housing. What if he'd been in less restrictive housing, or what if someone else had done this?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think when I read this, and maybe when Joe comes back, he can clarify it. I think what happens here is that maybe within the same house they operate in silos, and when there's a need, there is no communication. Hey, hey, Joe, this was unique, and tell me if me and Russ are explaining this right.
Sure.
So it talks about eliminate multiple security rosters at correctional facilities. So what I got out of this was, it says the existing practice of running multiple separate turnout rosters at each facility can result in more critical posts being left unfulfilled in favor of less critical posts. Lopez was housed in the restrictive housing unit at the Hughes unit. Okay, the Hughes unit has two. We read this before, but tell me if I'm right with this. So I have a feeling this, like you have one big house, right? Let's just say this is my facility, and inside this facility we have different compartments, right? This is our restorative housing. This is our GP, whatever it is. And sometimes what happens is we operate in silos, right? So my manpower, I can only draw from this restorative housing spot. That's my pool. That's all I got. The full men, that's their pool. That's all they got. So what happens here is, let's say I'm short in restorative housing. I'm only trying to work with the pool that I got, when maybe I could look at full men and see if they can send me somebody over, but we operate in silos, so they may not be able, or I don't know what they're utilizing because we're not communicating with each other. But is that what it is? Is it one house that has multiple compartments that is operating in isolated fashion? And the biggest concern is because they're not communicating and everybody's working in their silo, they're not, like Russ said, they're not really trading Peter. Not that's the best idea either, like Russ said, but maybe this guy in full men, this officer, I could better use here in RHU, but he actually belongs to this supervisor, and that's his people.
Yeah, I mean, such as a facility like Hughes, and the facility I was on, Gib Lewis, it's one big house, and you're divided two sides. You got your general population, and you got your high security. So each side technically has two rosters. I don't have a non-shift roster, but each side has a roster. This happens to be high security side with category 1s and category 2s. Then you have what you call what you refer to as a non-baseline. That may be your education, your infirmary, any kind of vocational programs that require a security officer to be out there. Basically all your, chapel, programmatic, non-programmatic activity roster. And, that also accounts for positions like your ACA officer, your pre-officer, your STG officer, officers that are assigned to their own little department, property officer, chemical officer, key control, armory. That's on what we call a non-shift roster. So inside this house that's divided by two, you actually have 4 rosters that are getting turned in every day. 4. and that's for AM, and you have another 4 for PM. So that's 8 rosters a day getting turned in, showing daily activity for one unit.
Right. So what I had been talking to Anthony about when he was when you were gone is they were talking about, you know, skimming from some of those lower security parts of the unit, the more general population, if you will, in order to run them and have them help out, though, as far as a recommendation goes to the more secure housing. My thought on that is, though, is robbing that Peter to pay Paul isn't necessarily a good thing, because those general population units, they may have a lot more movement. They may have a lot more activity going on. And, you know, sometimes in some of the higher security areas, you actually have less drama going on. But of course, then we're also talking about whether or not those guys would have, if they'd had a little more help, maybe they would have done a little better search. But I think that's there's a little bit of hindsight bias mixed in that, to try and say, oh yeah, if we had just robbed from the lower areas, from the more general population, then everything would have been okay.
Yeah, and by the way, I agree with Russ. I don't think, again, we're at a position where I don't think it's ideal, but I understand why it's being suggested. Because these people that are coming in doing this audit, they're looking at the facility as a whole, and I have a feeling that the facility itself, because they're so used to this practice, they still operate as a silo. So having that higher level, they're thinking like, wait a second, guys. You got people here you can utilize. No, that belongs to that sergeant, or that belongs to that area. Guys, it's still one facility. And it's funny thing, if you can go to a whole nother level, agency could look at it that way too. You know, but we don't want to start doing that, like Russ said, because you wind up taking the resources and it doesn't solve anything. It's just symptomatic in the long run. Now we have
And the other problem too that I just have, that is just a matter of the way you look at problem solving, is that hindsight bias is possible. You look back and say, oh yeah, if we had done such and such, we would have fixed that. But we're only seeing it because we're looking back. We couldn't predict it. It didn't look that way before. And we're only solving that one problem. We don't necessarily see other problems that we might be unsolving, so to speak.
Well, yeah, well, that's always going to be the biggest concern, because now, who's really the one responsible to tell you what's more of a priority or not? So when I start switching,
it gets sticky. It gets sticky.
Yeah, because that counted right at the very beginning. Remember when we were talking about the priority one post and stuff like that, and it gets to that point where you're starting to maneuver people. I mean, they're all priority one. Technically, they all equate to that same level of priority. So now, who makes that determination that one priority is less than the other? You know, so now I may be taking something from full min, but to them it's a priority. You know, but again, it's not ideal, because, you know, we're working understaffed, and now we're trying to address these concerns, but this isn't ideal anyway. You know, so it's crazy, because this is what, guys, just in brief, and again to the public here, these are impossible times, and we're trying to make decisions that are literally possible, that really it's like making we're trying our best to make a worse decision into just a bad decision. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense. But yeah. If that makes any sense. So
absolute sense.
We got address gaps in annual in-service training. TDCJ acknowledges past gaps in annual training due to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, and has begun addressing those gaps. Also, as part of annual training, the agency should elevate training on key security lapses identified during the Lopez Escape review. These include strip searches, application of restraints, managing inmates, and in restrictive housing and transportation supervision. I mean, guys, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, unless you guys want to add anything to that.
No, I think that kind of speaks for itself. Everyone should be getting all the training that they absolutely need.
Yeah, and that also follows back into annual refreshers and training for transportation staff. Staff hired into the transportation unit participate in the initial offender transportation training program, but no annual transportation-specific refresher training is required. TDCJ has recently implemented a corrective action after the Lopez escape that included requiring transportation supervisors regularly evaluate transportation officers while preparing and conducting transports. We recommend this evaluation includes some time mentoring staff on transportation security requirements, including searches, restraints, and supervision. I do agree with that, guys. I mean, that definitely is definitely worth annual refresher.
Part of the problem though is once again is that should have been the routine, that should have been the norm, that should have been the happenstance. This should have been something that we could have assumed from the get-go that all of this was being done, and yet once again it wasn't.
Right now, guys, I'm gonna skip over the background of the TDCJ. I'm gonna skip over the background of Gonzalo-Lopez, because we know he's a problematic inmate involved in assaults and all this other stuff. We did touch on briefly the staffing concerns. What I would like to do, and they also talked about the priority 1 positions, the priority 2 positions, and the position deviations. Now, for them, the position deviations are what I call non-essentials, like a trip or constant watch observation, stuff like that. It's stuff that's really not daily or routine, but you got to have someone in play because you still have to manage the post that's now come up. But I would like to go. Now, this actually talks about transportation, but it kind of falls into the staffing. So we let's just talk about the incident now, so we can start to close this dialogue off. So this is an escape timeline of this is what I want to discuss real quick. This is the timeline. This is going to be interesting. So, is there anything you guys would like to add on the corrective actions made, or that need to be made? Because when we read the timeline, we're going to kind of go back into those areas again. But anything you want to say before we move into the actual timeline of the incident that occurred?
No, just what page does that occur on, so I can keep up here a little bit.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so in the form, it's going to be chapter 4, and it starts at page 21.
Okay, I got it.
So now this will be the specific details, which is great because now this is going to kind of spell it out. So here's what I'll do. I'll read it through, and then I'll probably stop in some places too to ask questions. But if you guys catch something as I'm reading through that you want to comment on, just say, yo, Gange, can I pick up on something on that or whatever it is? And we'll go into that a little bit. So let me go ahead and just touch on this because, guys, this is the real specific incident now. And this is actually going to kind of touch on what we already discussed. But let's just see how it plays out. So transport rationale history. Inmate Lopez, May 12, 2022. Transport was predicated on the need for, it's probably, so why they have it blacked out, that's going to be his medical concern. So it's HIPAA. So they're not going to tell you what his medical concern is. And the medical was handled at the Estelle unit. He had a history of, that's going to go back to his medical concerns, and had recently identified concerns with blah, blah, blah. That's all his medical stuff. Medical clinics are provided regionally with TDCJ through their contract with the University of Texas Medical Branch. And the Estelle unit provided a regional blank. Lopez had several previous transports for medical needs. So, guys, all the blackout stuff there is really specific to why he was going out on the trip. And even though he's dead, I guess they're still focusing on the HIPAA rights. All right, description of escape. CGL understanding of the events leading up to the escape were the results of the following. A review of a considerable number of policies, procedures, and documents provided by TDCJ, interviews with TDCJ staff, and review of video evidence from the Hughes unit displaying the preparation of Lopez for the upcoming transport, inspection of the Hughes unit, and the transport bus used in the escape. So right now, before we go any further, would you guys both agree, just on those 4 points alone, that this was pretty detailed investigation or audit, whatever you want to call it? What's your thoughts on that, Russ? Based on those 4 areas that they hit up, would you agree it's pretty detailed?
Yeah, I think it is. I'm trying to think about, anything that they might have potentially missed. But yeah, I'm looking, they reviewed the video. That's all good. They interviewed staff. They don't mention whether any staff declined that, at least not in this spot, or I may have missed it. They looked over, the policies and procedures. I don't know if I know at one point they talked about some of this guy's, past bad bad acts.
Yep.
So I don't know necessarily. I didn't see anything specific to transports, but that would have been interesting. So it looks like, yeah, they're all spooled up and ready to go and ready to tee off on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think even when they interviewed the TDCJ staff, it wouldn't just be officers. I think it would be classification, administration, the whole gamut, because I think that would be more detailed, and I think that would also highlight the inmate Gonzalo-Lopez's past actions, why was he considered high risk, and then so forth and so on. So here's what we got: preparation for transport. Here we go. In preparation for his off-site medical appointment, custody staff at the Hughes unit arrived at inmate Lopez's cell early on May 12, 2022 to begin the process of readying him for that day's medical transport. Prior to transport, per the chain officer, Joe, what is that?
That's the chain officer is the one that takes the group of, they're supposed to take the group of offenders from a holding area out to the chain bus. He's supposed to be out there doing the intake and intake and receiving of offenders outgoing and incoming, and they also supposed to be inventorying the property too.
All right, so we got post order. An inmate's personal property must be inventoried in accordance with 800372 offender property. The offender property directive requires staff document the property in the offender possession. Now, I will say this, guys, just out of curiosity, if this was only a day trip, I don't know if the guy was staying overnight. If this was a day trip, he didn't need any overnight bag. If there was medical prescriptions he needed, that could have been handled differently. And also, the most he would probably have been given, to be honest with you, is a lunch bag, depending on how far the trip would be. But if it was just a day trip to an infirmary to check something, I don't know why he would need any of his property at all. But
well, for him, that wasn't a day trip. For him, one way was 263 miles.
Oh, that's so it is.
So from Gatesville to the Estelle unit, it's roughly about 270 miles.
All right, so then we're looking at an overnight, let's say, correct?
Exactly.
So he still wouldn't need all his property. Then he would need a quick.
That's why they're authorized to take their KOP meds, their hygiene, and any current legal work.
All right, because again, it's a longer trip. Remember, I work in a smaller state.
Right.
Okay, so let's get this then. It'd be good if they had a closer unit, to be honest with you. Okay, so TDCJ policy requires that restrictive housing inmates are strip searched prior to leaving their cell, and any property they have be thoroughly searched. TDCJ policy defines a strip search as the observation of an offender with all clothing removed to permit a total visual inspection of the offender's body. Clothing shall be searched while removed from the offender. Policy also requires that any restrictive housing inmate must be strip searched prior to exiting their cell. The strip search is performed by staff who are to stand outside the cell and direct the inmate who remains in the cell through the strip search requirement. Okay, so here's step one. At 12:48 a.m. on May 12, 2022, Officer Randall Smith arrived at Lopez's cell in Unit 12F and issued Lopez 2 red bags for transport, chain bags, to pack his personal property prior to the transport. So what's a chain bag?
Chain bag is a red bag that you give the offender that they're authorized to carry their hygiene, current legal work, and KOP meds in.
All right, but they don't carry that while they're on the bus, though, right? They give it to you and you put it under the bus, or
it goes under the bus, and then they're given an extra chain bag or two, depending on how much property they have in the cell. And those 2 bags of property get stored in the property room.
Okay, so I do like the fact that they go to them very late at night. You know, the inmate's not getting any more phone calls at that point, and basically, here's your stuff, get it ready, you're leaving in the morning. To pack his personal, okay, we got that. At 1:26 a.m., C.O. Smith returned to Lopez's cell front along with C.O. Bernard Gouchard. C.O. Gouchard opened the cell door, allowing Lopez out of his cell. This action violated TDCJ policy and sound security practices, requiring all restrictive housing inmates be strip searched prior to being allowed out of their cell. Additionally, no hand restraints were placed on Lopez prior to opening the cell door. Okay, so let's do this real quick. We're going to have to discuss this. So this is a restorative housing unit inmate. So obviously there's measures here. So basically, this is an inmate that's restorative housing. So he's a problematic inmate that's put in a jail within the prison, technically. So they literally just now, are they saying Joe, from what I'm reading, that they opened up the cell door without having the inmate secured?
Exactly. That's exactly what they're saying.
And now what?
They opened up his door without strip searching him, without placing him in restraints. Since he's a 1A inmate, that's supposed to take place before you even open the door.
Okay, so let me ask just one question. What time is this trip supposed to go out? 3 a.m.?
Most of the times that they leave anywhere between 3 and 5 a.m. Just depends on the route the bus has to go.
Did Lopez know he had a trip this night or no?
They probably told him because obviously they told him because they're at his door giving him a chain bag.
No,
But the plus side to his custody level is he's not able to just up and leave out of his cell during a normal ingress, egress, or anything like that. He's in his cell all day, with the exception of the 1 hour he's supposed to come out for rec.
Right, and how would you visualize the strip through the glass, the window?
Through the glass window right there, yeah. You got a glass window, and you also have a plexiglass screen directly to the right.
Right, and to move an inmate like this from point A to point B, would that require a supervisor at this time of night?
It should, yes. And because of his custody level, there should be a supervisor in the area. And if not, a second officer in the area with him at the time that the door is open is also authorized.
Right. And it's also, as I said, it's also, guys, this, by the way, on top of this all, it's also overnight. So overnight, every inmate gets treated like a max inmate anyway. So to take an inmate like this just out of his cell without taking those proper precautions, I think that's definitely the first sign of complacency. Now, Russ, again, just reading this, Russ, what's your thoughts?
So yeah, a guy like this that I would normally be contacting, they would never ever be in our presence without handcuffs on. They come out of their cell with handcuffs on. They go to their yard with handcuffs on. Those are only removed afterwards. In some of the units I've worked, they would go through 2 or 3 different strip searches. So to me that's a big deal, because in all of the ADSEG and all of the security housing that I've worked and death row, none of these guys would be in our presence without handcuffs on.
Yeah, and guys, as you read through this, you're going to see there's greater concerns now too. So
I mean, that's how dangerous these guys are. Is that the same thing there with an inmate of this level, Joe?
Yes.
Yeah, I even with us too.
He would be just like a super seg inmate.
Yeah. So this screams at me. This just makes me think like, man, what is really going on? Because I'll tell you, I'd be scared. I'd be scared to take a guy like that out of his cell.
Right. And Joe, let me ask you a question real quick, Joe, before we move forward. These officers aren't the one that did the trip. Let's let people know that. These are the officers that get him out for the transport, correct?
That is correct.
So now here's another thing about this all, guys, that bothers me. This is the first initial step to prepare him for the transport, which means that when I give you over this inmate, even though you're going to check the inmate too, I'm going to check to make sure I'm giving you an inmate that's not a threat to you. Then eventually you'll check the inmate as well. Don't get me wrong. We're all responsible for checking our own inmates. But this is why, guys, you got to be careful when you get an inmate that comes to your unit and you make the assumption that they were checked. And it's like, no, I know my boy checked him, and I know you're back in my unit now. Don't worry about it. Go right up to your unit. No, this could be the case where, you think the officer checked them beforehand, but they didn't. And then now they're a threat. Because having said that, if I was a transport officer, let's say, and I'm trusting that this inmate's going through all these measures, and I decide, out of convenience, oh, you know what, let's just put him on the bus because he was already stripped in the unit. He wasn't. So I like that. This is the first layer of failure here. So that this is unique.
A direct failure.
A direct failure, yes. So yeah. Lopez then handed C.O. Smith a bag of his property. C.O. Smith then apparently, at the request of inmate Lopez, walked to the front of another inmate, I don't know their name, it's not their cell, who was 3 cells away, and sat the property in front of that cell while gesturing for the inmate to get it. This action is also in non-compliance with TDCJ policy and sound security practices. Transferring property between inmates is considered trading and trafficking and could be in support of payment for some form of debt. Additionally, staff did not search the property. Okay, guys.
And what that is, you know what?
That's not even complacency.
I'm coming back tomorrow. If you would, boss, just give my property to my celly next door. He's going to hold on to my property till I get back tomorrow.
Yeah. Hey, Russ, do me a favor, because at this point here, I don't even consider this complacency. I consider this negligence. Can you tell me the difference between the two?
I would say that, the real difference between, complacency and negligence is probably a very thin line. But with complacency, at least there's kind of some perfunctory actions that you would take. You're just not doing something to its full extent. In this case, they're actually truncating the entire process, and they're only going through the steps. They took him out of the cell, but they didn't have him cuffed. Well, at least they should have had him cuffed, and maybe they do a half-ass strip search on him. Maybe they did let him transfer that property, but maybe they would have at least checked it first, just in order for it to convenience them. But that's the true difference there is there's a perfunctory way that sometimes staff get caught up in the way that they're doing their job, and it kind of complies with everything that's going on. In this case, it's just a complete abandonment of good, sound correctional practices.
Yeah, and guys, by the way, the supervisor is the one that we depend on to eliminate complacent acts or negligence. So the next part's unique because at 2:05 a.m., Sergeant Watson came to the front of the other inmate's cell, where he opened the pass-through on the cell front and handed Lopez's red property bag through. Again, this was done without any search of the property bag and in non-compliance with agency policy. So I know we're going to have to stop again on this, but I'll go with Joe first. Joe, this is the supervisor now that just passed that bag off. The supervisor.
Yep. So, epic failure of systemic proportions.
So if you see your sergeant doing this, can you automatically assume that your officers need to be checked too?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, if your sergeant's that comfortable in doing it, then you automatically know the COs are doing it because it's just been the common practice.
It would have been great to have seen the Sergeant Watson come in and say, "What the hell is this bag here for?"
Yep.
What's going on? What are you doing with this? So now next part at 9:34 a.m. So now the trip goes out. Trip goes out a little later. Correctional Officer Gerardo Velasquez and Dylan Miller approach inmate Lopez's cell to prepare him for removal. So now these are the next shift officers, I'm assuming. These officers begin the strip search process, but video evidence reveals that they only conducted a cursory search and failed to follow required strip search procedures. Specifically, staff did not maintain constant observation of Lopez in his cell during the search. The staff can be seen talking among themselves and looking away from the cell. Additionally, Lopez's clothing was not thoroughly searched. All right, Russ, what do you got?
Okay, so unfortunately, a strip search is not always a pleasant event for either the officer or the inmate, but it's absolutely necessary. And if you're not 100% focused on that inmate, there is a chance that they could get something by you. There's a big chance that they're going to get something by you anyway, but why play into that? That's why we have these multiple layers, and that first layer of bringing them out, hopefully every time they should be completely free of contraband. That's probably an unrealistic expectation, but that's what you're hoping for if you at least do it the right way. When they get onto the further layers, that's where the real breakdown happens. But in this case here, it's like they're not even trying. It's like they're saying, hey, you know what? The next layer, those guys, they'll catch it. We have other things to do. I don't know that that's necessarily their internal dialogue, but that's the way that I see it.
Yeah, and I will tell you another thing, too, that's unique. If this was an inmate in restorative housing that had another cell inmate, had another cellie with him, another inmate in the cell, they wouldn't be able to strip him in his cell. That would be a PREA violation because the other inmate would be in a position to witness that strip. So the stripping in the cell, I would rather do where I know they're stripping the inmate to take him out, but I would rather secure the inmate, take them out of secure them. You have them secured. Take them out of the cell and bring them to a strip area where it's more controlled and observed. But I don't know. What are your thoughts about stripping? Yeah, is that
Okay? So let me tell you about an incident that I was involved in, where the idea behind it is the inmate that we were stripping, and he was only single celled, right? And the idea behind this is that he was going to show us all of his clothing. We were going to look through all of his clothes, strip him, right, and then he was going to turn around and sit down, and we had mesh in front of him, and he was going to put a different set of sneakers on because it was hard to see in these cells, and that sneaker, one of them, was going to have a spike in it, and he was going to kill one of us that was taking him out of the cell, specifically probably me. And so removing them from the cell like that, I guess maybe if you can see better or something like that. But man, I'll just tell you, I'm not really comfortable with doing that.
The reason why I said that was, one, definitely for vision. I agree with that. But what I was going to say is, what about if he does have a cellmate? Are you able to strip the inmate with the other cellmate there?
I'm gonna tell you that I was never in a position. Of course, I was there when Priya had come into play, but we never had that as an issue. We always stripped them. Now, whether or not that changed, because I was kind of on the cusp there a little bit before things really got implemented well in California, I don't know. Joe would be a much better person to ask about this. He's an expert.
Joe, what are your thoughts about stripping the person in their cell or bringing them out into there'll be a strip cage or something like that?
Okay, so technically, because of his custody level, 8 out of 10 times he's going to be single celled anyways, because he's assaultive in nature. You don't know if he's assaultive towards staff or offenders. So 9 times out of 10, he's going to be single celled anyway. In the event that he does have a cellmate, they do have what they call a protective curtain. Each cell has hooks on either wall. You can hand this curtain to the offender. He hangs the curtain up while his cellmate stands up and faces the back wall. At the front of the cell, you can conduct your search. Once the search is over, then the offender takes down the curtain. After you've given his clothes back to him, after you've performed a proper strip search, he'll put his clothes back on. He'll hand you the curtain back. You search it as well.
All right. So just out of curiosity, so there's no procedure to take the inmate out of the cell and strip him in like a strip cage. Okay.
No, because what happened several years ago was at the Styles unit, they had an officer that did that, took an inmate out of the cell, and he wound up getting the convict wound up breaking loose of his cuffs and turned around, stabbed the officer in the eye with a pen or a pencil, and shoved it in, got it in about 2.5 inches into his eye socket.
Well, it definitely makes guys. I'm not. It makes 100%. It makes 100%.
But they try everything within their power to accommodate Priya, and like I said, they have a curtain because each cell has hooks on either wall, so they can wash or put their clothesline up during the day and hang their clothes up. So they use those hooks for what they call a Priya curtain. You hand it in, the cellmate stands up, he faces the back wall where he's not viewing the strip search, and
I'm just curious to see if people are watching this, they get this far. I'm curious to see what their thoughts are. And obviously it makes 100%. I'm 100% agreement with you guys that it is the safest way to do it. Again, my biggest concern here too is the officers just not even looking in there and just kind of chatting and, being distracted. But I'm curious to see if people actually do the strips that way or, listen, a while ago, not done anymore, the officer would be, let's say, out. So let's say how the unit is you have your cell. Then you have a gate in front of it, like a restorative housing unit. And then you have, maybe let's say the public area or where the officers could be. So the officers would pop the cell, bring the inmate out, and the inmate would actually strip on the tier. No one else could see it unless you're from above. This is before Priya, guys. This is where the inmate would come out, they'd strip him on the tier, and then they would move. Then when Priya came in, obviously you can't do that practice anymore because other inmates could see the strip being done. So then it turned into we strip in the cell, but then it came with the cellmates. Like you said, that curtain is a great idea because then the other concern, because by the way, inmates are always trying to get out of being strip search. So there's so many, you come up with an idea, you move up, they move up in another level. And it's like the one thing was, okay, well now I got let's say I got inmates that got to come out to yard, and they're cellmates. So at one point, what they would do is they would pull the one inmate out, have him go to the side, then strip the one guy, But the problem is you just strip this guy. So that guy cannot go back into the cell now, the one guy you're coming out, Then it was just a bit of a back and forth. But finally, the method that is what you said, the method that's used. If it's single cell, yes, I'm peeking in, I'm doing the strip search inside the cell door. And I really do love the idea that if it is double cell, giving the person a curtain and then, giving the person the privacy as they do their strip. So we have a short while later, video shows inmate Lopez passing his hands through the door, pass through, and hand restraints are applied by CO Velasquez. Lopez is removed from his cell by the officers and is seen on video carrying his mattress and blanket behind his back while handcuffed from behind. In violation of policy, he's allowed to walk in front of inmate blank cell and drop off items. All right, so that's just whoever that person is, man. And Lopez is then escorted to a small room in Building 12 by CO Velasquez and Dillon, typically used for legal visits, AB legal booth. He's secured in the room, and that's a picture of Lopez being escorted by CO Velasquez and CO Dillon. Hey, Russ, real quick. He's got his hand on the cuffs. That looks good. He's walking next to him. The officer's behind him. I mean, that looks okay, right?
Which page is that on exactly? I lost 23.
I'm showing you I can enlarge it here.
Okay, I got.
I think it looks like a proper escort right now.
No, it's not.
I don't like. Okay, so I can't see what kind of cuffs they have, but I would never put my hand on a pair of cuffs during an escort ever.
Well, we don't know if his hands are on the cuffs. It could be on the guy's wrist, right? We don't know.
Okay, I see. I can see it now. I see this one. I thought it was from behind at first, but I mean that's all well and good. But letting him have different things in his hands during escort is a really, really bad idea because you don't know if there's a razor blade in there or anything else. And
that's what I want to. Yeah, I want to ask you a question on that, Joe, because they didn't say that was the violation of policy. They said the violation of policy is when he passed something off to the other cell. But I don't even know, where is the mattress?
He dropped it off in front of the cell.
That's what he gave to the cell, was his mattress.
Yeah, he dropped it. He dropped it in front of his cell. Normally when they bring him out, they pull the mattress and everything out with it. And once the offender's gone, the mattress is taken and sanitized.
So out of curiosity, Joe, you said that. I think the guy has his hands on his wrist. I don't think his hands are on the cuffs, but you never know. But what's your initial input on the escort? What's your concerns?
Number one is you only have one officer who's maintaining control of a level 1A SEG offender, assaultive offender, which both of them should have hands on the elbows. Number two, we teach them do not grab them by the cuffs because most cuffs have links. And I've had officers have their fingertips taken off by strong convicts who know how to pop those cuffs and slam those links together. Yes. So, just as a safety factor, you never grab somebody by the cuffs. You always grab them by the elbow. Right. This way, if they start to resist, you already have a firm grip and you have something to invoke a use of force with.
All right. So I didn't think he was grabbing the cuffs. I thought he was grabbing his wrist or something.
Which, and if they do, they do. I mean, it's not that it's against policy. It's not against policy. It's not policy.
But let me ask. I still want to go back to that the actual escort real quick. So the one guy next to him holding him and the guy behind him. I mean, is that really out of? I've seen it both ways, guys. I'm going to be honest with you. I've seen it where you got one person on each side and they have control, yes. But I also seen it where you have the one person, holding the guy, but still behind him, and then you got the other guy a little further behind, but definitely never in front of the inmate. We know that. We can eliminate that right off the bat. You're never in front of the inmate. The inmate's never behind you. But you're 100% against the way this is being escorted right now?
Absolutely. If you got two
Okay.
people there, two people should have hands on.
Russ, 100. What same thoughts?
Just for
if I was going to say, if we had a guy like this in some of the units I've been in, it would be a 3-on-1.
There it is.
I sometimes we would run, two guys, one on each elbow. Sometimes we'd have, one guy hanging back like that a little bit, ready to, deploy a baton if necessary. So I can't see the belts on these guys. Do you guys carry batons, Joe?
No.
Okay, so see, we had a little bit extra equipment to deal with, and so probably not as critical for us to be up there on a guy like that.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of agree with Russ. You get the one guy that's up close to maintain control, but I think you also have the other guy, since you're only working with two, because I would like to have seen maybe two officers and a supervisor, and the supervisor behind them, if need be, and then the two officers more physical. But you need the one person to have some tactical advantage to maybe a distance to, get out OC or baton. But I guess maybe, again, we're not in an ideal situation where they had the manpower to maybe get two officers and a sergeant or whatnot. But again, ideally, two people on top of them, like we got going on here, and then one person at a distance. But if I only have the two people, I honestly would say, because it is a normal routine escort, regardless of what he did, it's, moving a guy from RHU, the one guy holding him and the other guy a little bit behind them, just in case they got to pull out something to react. I mean, I don't know.
The only thing we teach them is because of a safety factor, that there's no resistance on the opposite side of that convict if he decides to lunge at Officer Brenniger there and try to headbutt him. If you have another officer on that other side there, holding his elbow, you got somebody to keep him from lunging in either direction.
Yeah, but it doesn't. It pulls both officers right into it without the officer being able to maybe pull out some mechanical force, like an OC or something. But again, we're not talking about an ideal situation anyway, because technically I would love to see two officers on him and then the sergeant in the back. But if I didn't have that amount of manpower, I don't know. I'm not 100% against the way they're walking him now. I mean,
the way I read the report was both sergeants were assigned to that area as officers anyway.
All right, let's get further. Okay, hold on.
Oh, really?
So,
yes.
Wow.
Jesus Christ. So at 10:18 a.m., Transportation Correctional Officer Jimmy Brangner and CO Miller arrive at the AB legal booth. TCO Bringer initiated the strip search of Lopez by standing outside the room, opening the pass-through and having Lopez hand him his clothing for search. The search for clothing was not as thorough as required, as TCO Beringer also did not instruct Lopez to complete all the required elements of a strip search, and constant observation of Lopez was not monitored. Part of the issue was that the room was not appropriate for observing a strip search through the door, given the door's construction would obscure the line of sight. That's my problem with the cell doors too sometimes. CO Miller and another correctional officer were also present outside the room, but were not observing the strip search while it took place. And it says here, TCO Brenninger's applying hand restraints to Lopez through AB legal booth door opening. Hey, so real quick when it comes to this, and I'll have Russ go first. So I love the exchange here, by the way. Let's just start with something positive at least. God, it's not a full search, and we'll get to that, but at least the officers knew, like, okay, I did the strip, but you still have to do the strip. I thought that when I was reading this, they were going to say that the officers took the inmate and went. So at least the officer that's doing this, that's doing the transport, knows that now this inmate's my responsibility. I don't care if you guys stripped them before, but I'm going to strip them now, and they're going to go ahead and start moving forward. But now the fact that the strip's not thorough, so we guys been through this before, so let's just see. At the completion of TCO Barringer's strip search, Lopez passed his hands through the door, passed through, and hand restraints were applied. Additionally, TCO Brenniger applied a cuff protector. That's the black boxes. We know what those are placed between the handcuffs to block inmates from manipulating the hand restraints and having access to the keyhole. An internal review after the escape found that Some cuff protectors did not fully cover the keyholes in the hand restraints, which may have allowed inmate Lopez to manipulate the mechanism in his escape. So, do you want to get to that about faulty equipment? Obviously, he can't sit with the handcuffs behind him. We know that.
You remember we did that show
a
while back about the blue boxes and the black boxes, and one covered the keyhole, the other one did not.
So how are you? So let's do this. I'll start with Russ first, and then go with Joe. How are we checking for faulty equipment before we? I mean, these equipments are used constantly. So what are the things we're checking for our black boxes?
So we didn't use black boxes, unfortunately. So it came down to pretty much, the mechanics of the handcuffs themselves, which are usually, your standard peerless ones. The other thing that we always had is we always used what was called a Martin chain, which basically had a link that had a metal slot through it that the cuffs went through. And so those were easy to check because there was nothing really mechanical about the Martin chain. It was only the cuffs themselves. And, it's pretty much, you check and feel and you make sure that the locking mechanisms work and that pawl ratchet, engages and that you double lock them. Like I say, unfortunately, we didn't have the black boxes.
And what about you? What about you, Joe? What are you looking at when you're checking this equipment?
You're looking at the integrity of the black box, make sure the hinges aren't torn, manipulated, cut in any way. Same thing, checking the hand restraints, checking the leg restraints to make sure that the links are still in good shape, no signs of tampering, checking the ratchet arms, making sure, closing them, doing a full circle, close them and pulling them backwards just to make sure that the plunger hasn't been tampered with, It's, and then of course, on top of the black box, you also have a padlock with a key. So you got to make sure that that's functional because once you put that black box on, that belly chain goes through the cuffs. And then,
Yeah, this, as you read this, guys, I mean, so now after the AB legal booth opened, leg restraints were applied to Lopez over his pant leg, causing them to fit loosely around inmate Lopez's legs. Obviously, you don't put it over the pants leg. You put it on his ankle. Lopez is allowed outside the AB legal booth and escorted out of the building by TCO Bringer and CO Miller. During this escort out, he's directed past a device that screens inmates for the presence of metal on their person. This device, known as the Body Orifice Security Scanner or Boss Chair, is designed to quickly detect metallic contraband within body cavities of inmates. Agency policy requires restrictive housing inmates be scanned in the Boss Chair prior to be placed on a transport. This device was not used on inmate Lopez. That to me is probably worse than the strips. Like, I mean, you're not doing the strips properly, but then you just walk right past the Boss Chair. I mean, what's your thoughts there, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, the Boss Chair is definitely number one, and it's placed back there by the strip search area and the chain area for that reason. Once they're strip searched, you're technically supposed to walk them out, have them sit in the Boss Chair, place their head on either side, their mouth on either side of the pad to make sure that they have no metal objects like he did, a handcuff key, a home fashioned handcuff key in his mouth.
And then they go
that
around.
Was probably, to me, that was probably the biggest failure.
Yeah, 100%. And they go around. And you know what's funny about this, guys? Let me ask you a question about this. So he's handcuffed, so the Boss Chair is bound to go off. So Russ, what's the procedure here? He's already handcuffed. So obviously we're checking the jaw and stuff. But wouldn't the Boss Chair be put before the metal shackles are on?
You would think, but I don't know. I never had that experience with the whole Boss Chair thing. Everything that we did, I guess, because it was back in the day, was with handheld scanners, and so that's why I wasn't present when it happened. But we actually found a handcuff key on Richard Ramirez. When he came back from San Francisco County. So you can imagine how embarrassing that was for San Francisco County to bring us a high-level inmate like that who actually did have a handcuff key secreted on him.
Yeah, so like if the inmate has to go through the boss chair, they can't go through secured. With medical shackles on, obviously. So what some procedures would be is that the boss chair is in a very secured location. You would have enough manpower there, and then before you shackle them in their final set of shackles to go ahead and go into the transport, they would be unshackled with their backup team there, escorted to the chair for the metal detector to detect any metal, and then brought back
So,
and secured.
so is that the reason they bypassed it, or were they
I
just
don't.
trying to make up time?
Well, that's the funny part. So
And
that's a concern. So here's the thing, for any transport going in or coming back, whatever it is, you're always going to do the boss chair. You can't get around that. That's essential. What you're going to do is you're going to get the guy to do the jaws, but they still have to sit in that chair because most of the time they're going to be hiding stuff that could be inside them. So you sit the person in the chair, and it does have some marks of where it could be, but guys, the guy's loaded with metal right now. So what we tend to do is, even if it's a highly restrictive inmate, you do get your team there, but you're gonna have to get that person in the chair. So what you could do is you could use a flexi cuff. There's a couple of things you could do to supplement the metal cuffs. But if they're doing a trip right now, maybe that could be their reason for bypassing because he's already got the metal cuffs on him. But I think that they shouldn't have bypassed that chair. I think they should have found a way to have them go through that metal chair. It's a failure. It's a failure. I think that
it's
they
a
could have.
definite failure. I can tell you that there was no mention in either report about the boss chair not functioning. There was only a mention of the partial scanner, which they use for the scan the property.
So Joe, what the function is? Obviously, he can't go into that chair with metal shackles, right?
Correct.
So
Correct.
would it be the way
That
I
chair,
said?
that chair's on rollers. Okay. The boss chair is on rollers, so you can roll it wherever you need to. Normally, we'll roll it inside the chain area in a secure location where it's just the officers and him, and they will go ahead and put him in that chair without and then they'll reconnect his restraints.
Yeah, because they have to unsecure the inmate to put him in the
Yeah,
boss
you
chair.
can. Yeah,
And
yeah,
to be honest with
you can't set a sensitivity level on a boss chair like that.
right, and to be honest with you, the transport officers, that's when they could put their stuff on them. So the person could still remain in cuffs with the facility stuff, and then the boss chair would technically be the trade-off point.
Correct.
Okay, I'm going to take my stuff back, and then you go ahead and put yours on. And by the way, you got your transport officers there. You're there. You got a good enough team there. Let's do what we got to do. But now let me get my cuffs back because they're on my count. I'll put those here. And now the transport officers take theirs. I think that the transport officers should not have done the exchange until the inmate had went through the boss chair first. That's my opinion. But again, so now we're going to go to 10:24 a.m. Lopez was escorted outside of 12 building into a Sallyport area where the inmates are placed on the bus. This area should be free of other inmates during transport preparation, but video review found a large number of inmates in this area at the time. Lopez was being escorted through it. In this area, his identity was verified by staff, and he was provided a sack meal for transport. I talked about that, guys. I said the only thing they may have on their person is a sack meal. But I wonder with the sack meal, I don't know who gave them the sack meal. I mean, at the end of the day, that sack meal also has to be looked at and go through many channels. So if the
that in itself is pretty routine. When you have a bus ride that's going to be longer than 2 hours, they'll provide a what they call a Johnny sack for them to eat because by the time they get to the next unit, chances are the chow's over and they've already started the food.
And before that bag goes to the inmate, the transporting officers are the ones that should look at it.
Exactly.
It should not go directly to that inmate's hand until the transporting officers have reviewed it and made sure.
There shouldn't have been a single offender on that sidewalk at the time that Lopez was out there because of his custody status.
Yeah, but can I tell you something? This is where I agree with you, but this is where, and then we're still mixing them in with GP inmates on a bus. So immediately following, Lopez is escorted onto the transport bus by TCO Bringinger and CO Miller and reported to be placed in the restrictive housing compartment that separates those inmates from general population. This section is immediately behind the bus driver's seat and is secured by a front and back door, metal supports, expanded steel, and plexiglass. So you can clearly see it here. And then both COs left the area while Transportation Correctional Officer Randy Smith remained behind, loading property into the underbody storage of the bus. TCO Smith then departed from the area for an extended period, leaving the bus and its occupants. Now that, go ahead, Russ. Here, let me finish it off. Leaving the bus and its occupants unsupervised. This is a violation of TDCJ transport officers' post orders that state at no time during the transport the offender shall the vehicle be left unattended. Russ, what's your thoughts when you read that?
Okay, yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes we poorly learn from history, but I'm sure that Joe will back me up on this. The times that we've left transport buses, vehicles, things happening in the Sally Port, and so on, often ends up with one of us getting killed or someone in the public getting killed because somehow they managed to get to it and ram a Sally Port or get out onto the road and destroy somebody's life. So that's the reason why you don't ever leave them, for that reason alone. The other parts being is it gives them a chance to do something, hinky, trying to dig through that expanded metal, for instance, or perhaps even, I don't know exactly what access they might have to each other if they're back in that general population port, but there's no accounting for their activity at that point. So, we had instances where we had one time we had an actual cement truck stolen and rammed through and destroyed a security fence. And yeah, great. The guy only got 100 yards, but you know what? If he'd got another 100 yards, he might have killed somebody.
Right.
So never is there a time where somebody shouldn't not only be there and have them under their vision, but they should be in the control area of that vehicle, ready to take over controls or anything else if need be.
Yeah, and then so then it says at 10:56 a.m. So I mean, he was alone for 5 seconds is too much, and it looks like he was alone for 20 minutes maybe. I don't know. It doesn't really. I mean, he was put into the bus somewhere after 10:24. So, but either way, they can show that he was alone, or whatever. The inmates were unattended. At 10:56 a.m., the transport bus was fully loaded with 9 general population and 7 restrictive housing inmates and exited the 12-building Sallyport, headed for the Hughes unit back gate. When the bus pulled between the double Sallyport back gates, the back gate officer used a mirror to search under the vehicle and within the engine compartment. However, the post orders for the back gate office requires they maintain an accurate count of all offenders entering and exiting the unit. Video review did not find the back gate officer conducting any count of inmates on the bus. Wow. I get it, Joe. What do you got on that?
Yeah, I mean, the chain officer and the back gate boss are supposed to be working hand in hand along with the transport bosses. They're supposed to be taking travel cards, verifying pictures with convicts and their IDs, and they're supposed to be keeping a continuous count because, you never know when the lieutenant's going to call a special count. And if you have a bus inside the back gate, it's part of your responsibility to maintain visual, maintain a continuous count of your offender traffic in and out of that back gate.
And that Sallyport is the last failsafe.
At Sallyport is the last failsafe.
That's the last failsafe there. And then, all right, 15 out or 16 out, whatever the number would be.
Now, there's one where that bus is parked at. There is one more fence behind them on a motorized track that the picket boss has to open by button.
Right, but I will tell you one thing. I mean, we're relying on that Sallyport to have confirmed that number.
Exactly.
During our time on site, CGL team members inspected the bus that was used to transport Lopez. It was manufactured by the Bluebird Body Company with a manufacture date of April 2014. The interior layout of the bus and the restrictive housing unit of general population compartment are common for TDCJ transport buses. Hey, a little quick Little quick trivia, on the spot trivia, real quick. Bluebird. What gang was originally known
I know this one. I know this one.
As the Bluebird gang? Hold on, Russ. Joe, what gang was originally known as the Bluebird gang because they named themselves after the bus that would transport them back and forth?
Honestly, couldn't tell you.
I'll give you a hint before Russ shouts out the answer. I'll give you 2 hints.
No, but I'm going to give you the whole history.
Okay, my 2 hints are going to be Alice Baker or the brand.
Yes.
Still got nothing.
Go ahead, Russ.
Okay. So, yeah, you're correct that at first the Aryan Brotherhood did call themselves the Bluebirds, and then they migrated to a brand new term for a little bit where they were known as the Diamond Tooth Gang. Then eventually they became the Aryan Brotherhood.
Yep. Otherwise known as the 1-2.
1-2.
1-2. Okay, hold on. So, this is cool. So the transport bus has 3 officer seats. Driver seat, see it. Rear compartment, officer seated separated from the general population, seating by the metal and plexiglass. That's in the back. And the third officer seat only filled if third officer is on transport. Vacant door and local. All right, so basically you got the driver and then you got the guy in the back far away from. Okay, so now wait a second here, Joe. So let's do this for a second. Because you don't have that second driver or that third person to assist on the transport, the only seat you have now is the officer that there's no direct eyes on the RHU inmates.
Exactly. That's why I felt the shoe inmate should be at the back of the bus where that second passenger is, so they can maintain constant visual on the shoe inmates while you have your minimum custody inmates or Gen Pop up front.
No, but again, we're thinking that now, and I like what you said before by the evacuation. I get that, so it's very hard to challenge. I'm not looking to challenge that, but I feel that if you had that third officer that's up front, that's a better vantage point.
Exactly.
For the RHU inmates, but again,
had there been a third officer up there, he would have seen that guy was cutting through the cage.
Yeah, but that's why, you know what? As I said, I can't argue the evacuation point because if you're going for the preservation of lives, obviously GP is a lot quicker to get out. But I still feel that RHU, that guy, that third officer, which
if you have the third person, then yes, I would agree with the placement as the bus sits now. If you had the third person,
yeah, because that's a very good.
If you don't have that third person, to me it should be the other way around.
And what's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, that's the way I wanted to view it. I not just ideally, but I don't really see that they should have released. The transport without having that full one in there. I'm always been a big proponent of, for every gun you have to have another gun that can cover it. And so that's why I look to that happening up there and having the potential to be able to put more firepower on those inmates if something does start to go bad.
And there's something else that they meant that they didn't mention in this report. That's, a policy that a sergeant or a lieutenant or above is supposed to be checking the conditions of the restraints prior to an offender boarding a vehicle.
Yeah, that's definitely again, that's where that supervision comes in. That's another fail safe.
Yeah.
And it says that let's see, the inmate seating areas are broken into 2 separate compartments. The restrictive housing compartment is located immediately behind the driver and third officer seat. A larger compartment for general population inmates is located behind the restrictive housing compartment. To access the general population compartment, inmates must pass through the restrictive housing compartment. Wait a second. So, in order, a larger compartment to access the general population compartment, inmates must pass through. So here's the thing: you would have to load up the general population inmates first, secure them, and then do the restrictive housing. Correct?
Correct. You're supposed to. Yeah, the restrictive housing inmates are supposed to be the last to board a bus.
Okay, and then so at 11:11 a.m., So to be honest with you, I got to go back at it again. That's another good reason for them, the restrictive housing guys, to be in front, because they're the last loaded in. So you're not loading them in, and then GP is because let me see, they're up front, which means you get the GP in first, and you get the restrictive housing in, correct? Yeah, but I guess you could secure it if they're in the back anyway. All right, so at 11:11 a.m., the bus departed the Hughes unit en route to the Estelle unit near Huntsville. On board were two transportation COs. TCO Smith served as the driver, while TCO Brinegar was the rear compartment officer. Per policy, both were issued firearms that were on their duty belts. Now, the available video for CGL review ceases at that point. As of that time, TDCJ does not have any video capabilities on their transport buses. We'll get to that. And they have since begun piloting adding video equipment on buses. The description of further events in this narrative is based on interviews and reviews of TDCJ document. And this is a picture where the rear officer is in the back and the view of the bus from the rear door of the secure seating area. Hey, not having cameras, Joe, that's not good.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about, but then again, you're talking about a lot of buses. Something that the state would probably have to fund through some sort of a budgetary committee, because you're talking about, God, we have 4 regions of transportation statewide, and each one probably has 60 to 70 buses.
Maybe
in its yard. So
think it's possible that they could purchase the buses with the equipment already in there.
Doubt it, because they only get so many buses every couple of years through the budgetary committee, through legislation, and they'd be better off having it emergency funded. But I mean, it's possible. It's just going to be lengthy and costly.
I think it's something that they're definitely going to be doing now, though.
But I mean, if you can afford to put air conditioning in all the Texas units, then yeah, you can damn sure afford cameras in your buses.
Yeah. And then it goes, so TDCJ interviews with other inmates on the transport bus indicated that Lopez had given indication while on the bus that he might be escaping and asked if they were ready to rock and roll. TDCJ reports that upon departing the facility, Lopez showed 2 long metal weapons with string tied to them and what resembled a handcuff key in his mouth. Other inmates reported that Lopez was asking them how long their sentence were and if they wanted to escape with him. Inmate Blanc and his number initially expressed interest, but this changed when he realized Lopez planned to kill the transport officer, then hijack a car and kill the driver. Once the transport left the Hughes unit, it was reported the noise level increased as several inmates began instigating a loud rapping noise, banging, while blocking the view of the rear compartment for CTO Bringer. So basically, he couldn't see the restrictive housing unit inmates. Witnesses reported that Lopez quickly was able to remove his restraints and that the cuff protector placed over them did not obscure access to the hand restraint keyhole. Inmate witnesses further indicated that once out of the handcuffs, it took Lopez approximately 90 minutes to break through the bottom of the restrictive housing compartment door using the 2 metal weapons. These metal items have never been recovered. Other interviews of inmates found it was common not to be properly searched for transport and that they often provided advance notice of transport medical staff. So look at this. So that's the doorway. That's the driver's seat. I know they have a bot. There it is. That's the doorway that was cut by Lopez. And it took him 90 minutes. Russ, what's your thoughts on 90 minutes?
90 minutes. Okay, so once again, if we'd had maybe better video equipment, that would have been discovered. If we'd had that other person in that passenger seat immediately to the left of it there, then we would have detected that then. If we had detected his metal instruments, he would have never been able to get through that. And you know what? Maybe if they had done something a little more secure than just expanded metal on that door, he couldn't have got through it at all. So that's what I come up with, on the top of my head. I mean, we can always say, woulda, coulda, shoulda, but I don't like the way that expanded metal looks just sitting there,
Yeah,
I guess we expect that, then no one's ever going to get a tool on here to cut that. And then here we are today.
First off, I mean, even so, look at the officer's seat and look at the inmate. I mean, I don't want to say this. I don't know if it's true or not.
Okay, you're right. There should be a different orientation to that. Now, I don't know what all the laws are about, what kind of seats you can have, but he should have a seat and a neck protector that puts him, facing those guys, or a good thing between him with a camera that he can slew and look around and not miss something like that.
Can I ask you a question, both you guys? I don't know if it's in the report or not, but could he have been sleeping?
Driver?
No, not the driver. The third officer.
Well, it could be, because I mean, it scroll up to that next picture.
I apologize. Hold on, guys. I apologize. There's no one in that seat.
Yeah.
No, but we're thinking about the third seat.
Also, I'm talking
the third seat. The second. It's weird how they number it. Sorry, guys. So obviously I see a seat because they put third officer seat, but that was empty. So hold on. So you're right. The driver wouldn't be able to see that anyway. He's focused on the road.
But scroll up for just a minute to that next picture.
Yeah, I got confused for a second, man. Yeah.
Okay. Now, where that door is located is in the center aisle. So if that officer at the very back of the bus had stood up at any point in time within those 90 minutes and looked down that center aisle, he would have seen that convict cutting through that mesh.
I mean, we're looking at 90 minutes, man.
Yeah.
I mean, could the officer have been the officer in the back and seat? And why is it numbered that way?
Because that's the last seat to be filled. Because it's a requirement you have one in the front, one in the back with weapon.
Yeah, that's you need all three officers here, man. Because you're not protecting the driver.
No, not at all.
And you want to hear something funny? Even if, let's say, even with the GP, I mean, they could still just be as dangerous, and they're more free to start cutting. And you got an officer in the back. Do you think the officer in the back was taking it down?
All right.
So at 1:15 p.m., the transport bus. Wait, were we on the right spot? Wait, hold on. We did that. At 1:15 p.m., the transport bus was traveling east on State Highway 7 and between 4 and 6 miles outside of Centerville when TCO Smith, the driver, felt a tug on his handgun. He looked down to see Lopez coming through the back. That's gotta be scary, man. Lopez coming through the bottom of the restrictive housing compartment door. In interviews, TCO Smith reported he responded by covering his handgun and attempted to stop the bus by actuating the air brakes. This immediate stop pushed Lopez further into the driver's compartment of the bus, and a struggle ensued between the inmate and TCO Smith. During the struggle, Lopez continued to try to access CTO Smith's handgun, and both fell into the stairwell, causing the bus doors to open and both to fall on the pavement. Lopez began stabbing CTO Smith in what was repeatedly an 8 to 10-inch metal weapon. At that point, Lopez pressed a quick disconnect on CTO Smith's holster and gained control of the handgun from Smith's duty belt. CTO Berenger, seated in the officer's chair in the rear compartment, initially assumed the bus stopped due to an accident. He exited through the bus back door with a 12-gauge shotgun. He observed CTO Smith struggling with Lopez, and he reported he yelled at Lopez to stop, at which time Lopez jumped up and re-entered the bus. CTO Berenger proceeded on to CTO Smith's location and helped him up, and Smith indicated Lopez was trying to escape and had possession of his handgun. Berenger drew his own handgun and instructed Lopez to stop or he would shoot. Lopez placed the bus in forward gear. At this point, Berenger discharged the handgun 2 times at the bus. Lopez had possession of CTO Smith's handgun, but apparently was unable to remove it from its holster. He pointed the holstered handgun at TCO Berenger, however, did not fire the weapon. Berenger stepped out of the probable line of fire, then fired 2 additional rounds through the right passenger compartment window. Lopez began to drive away as CTO Smith took the shotgun from Berenger and yelled for Lopez to stop. Smith fired 1 round, blowing out the right rear tire. Lopez continued to drive east on State Highway 7 towards Centerville. CGL's inspection of the bus after the incident found shattered glass on the passenger side and a bullet hole through the front window. And that's it right there. And then you got, a brief time after the incident, Sean O'Reilly, chief of police for the city of Jewett, arrived on the scene and was informed by CTO Smith of the incident. Chief O'Reilly then pursued the bus while Smith and Berenger proceeded on foot. A civilian passing by stopped and asked CTO Smith if they were there with the bus that had wrecked near Centerville. The civilian drove Smith to that location where law enforcement officers were already on scene where the bus was located. Smith retrieved the TDCJ cellular phone from the bus and notified the Central Transportation Unit of the escape. Upon inspection of the bus, Lopez was not present, and the handgun Lopez had removed from CTO Smith's belt was in the driver's compartment of the bus, still in the holster. TDCJ initiated escape plan over the next several weeks, and that kind of gets to the let me just see something, Joe, before we go into this. Let me close.
The one sentence that sticks out to me is where the chief of police dusts the two correctional officers and hauls ass and leaves them behind to try to run on foot.
Yeah, he didn't even. I was looking at that too. Let's close this off. Then we could kind of get our closing. So let me see some. A brief time after the incident, we did that. They initiate their escape plan over the next several weeks. Efforts were made by law enforcement and TDCJ to track and capture inmate Lopez. On May 31st, 2022, 19 days after the escape, law enforcement was informed of a burglary of a property in the area where Lopez escaped. Fingerprints were taken from the scene along with DNA samples. On June 2nd, 2022, the samples were positively matched with inmate Lopez. On the same day, law enforcement was notified by an individual who had grown concerned after not hearing back from a relative in the area. Law enforcement responded to the residence and found the bodies of 5 individuals, 2 adult males, 3 minor children. A 1999 white Chevrolet Silverado pickup was discovered missing, and a be on a lookout was issued to law enforcement agencies statewide. A short while later, law enforcement deputies in Estacada County identified the missing pickup and followed it. The vehicle was disabled using spike strips. Gunfire broke out in between inmate Lopez and the deputies, ending with inmate Lopez being shot and killed. TDCJ owns internal review, found additional failures and practices about practice and policy compliance with staff, including lack of supervision. Custody supervisors were not appropriately monitoring staff or making the required supervisory rounds to the facility. Falsification of documents. Certain staff were found to have falsified documents regarding cell searches or security rounds performed. And that's probably, and we'll get to it, that's probably when they look backwards to see when were the last times these cells were searched. And then you get the officers that may have said they did it. And then when they check the cameras, they find that the officers are not doing their rounds or doing their searches. Advance notice of transports. Inmates interviewed reported it's not uncommon for UTMB staff to provide them advance notice of upcoming medical appointments or transports and other search issues. A small homemade toolkit was found in Lopez's boot, raising concern for both the search procedure and the allowance of inmates to wear their personal boots and shoes on transport. The serious consequences. Yeah. Serious consequences.
Man, you can't let them have their footwear.
Yeah. All right. So that's pretty much. Let me just close that part off. All right. So okay. So now we wrap that part up. So yeah, go ahead, Russ. What was that?
Oh, just getting to that part, and that's the part that I had read earlier. About them letting them have their old clothing and potentially letting them, have their footwear on. I mean, that's like corrections 101.
What do you mean, like the footwear? You mean that they usually get a different?
You put them in a brand new set of flip flops, and you don't let them. No matter how good you think that you can search that item on them, it still has a potential for getting contraband past you. So you never do that.
So wait, the inmates that you have that go on trips, what are you giving them for footwear?
They're not giving them flip flops, but they're not supposed to be taking their brogans or their personal boots from the commissary or personal sneakers. They put them in what they call Jackie Chan's, or like basic canvas slip on. Yeah, low quarter slippers is basically what it is.
Yeah, we called them. We had a couple different ones. One was gung fu slippers,
something like this, except canvas black.
Yeah, not what they've had a chance to alter or glue things into, or he had a toolkit inside of his shoe. I mean, oh my gosh, that's
inside of his state brogans. Yep.
Well, and they asked a question of Joe when they did News Nation if these inmates staff could be charged. Well, what's funny is complacency is one thing, but if negligence led to all this, it could go into a criminal matter. Because of the consequences.
The one thing I didn't allude to on that broadcast is that the Texas Rangers and Office of Inspector General, which is Internal Affairs, they're still investigating. Yeah. So nothing has been ruled out yet.
Yeah, because if negligence leads to
death, I mean you're held accountable. It's, I mean, not only deliberate indifference, but I mean, you're an accessory to manslaughter, if not murder.
All right, guys, we did it. I mean, that's a great breakdown. I mean, it's there if people want it. I'm sure it'll get its views. I'll post it up tomorrow. Do you guys have anything you'd like to say in closing, starting with Joe?
No, I mean, other than, for everybody who views the video, man, I'll be the first one to tell you that, I have taken shortcuts in my career. I can't really tell you of anybody who hasn't, regardless if it's paperwork or something small. But I'm telling you, when you start taking shortcuts on basic security practices, folks, I mean, it's a recipe for disaster. Falsifying state documents, it's a recipe for disaster just because of instances like this. It may be a 1 in 100 chance that it happens, or 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million. But I'm telling you, all it takes is that once. And here we are. 5 innocent people lost their lives because of shortcuts, because of complacency. Supervisors, I know you guys have it tough. You guys have probably, especially lieutenants in the TDCJ, you guys have probably the most shit job that there is. I've been there, walked that beat. Man, I'm telling you, you have got to be there for your folks. You have got to cover their bases. You got to cover yours. Because, when in the grand scheme of things, when shit hits the fan, guess who's going to get smoked first? It's going to be that lieutenant, because it's your shift. It's your responsibility to ensure order. It's your responsibility to ensure that everything is supposed to be going according to policy and procedure, man. So look out for yourself. Look out for your folks. Do the right thing. And, just think about the big picture, man. When I say play the what-if game, play that what-if game. You guys keep your heads up. You guys walk a tough beat, man. And my heart goes out to you, and much love and respect.
Yeah, and the scary thing about this is that even though I love what you said, taking the shortcuts on the basics, you should never take the shortcuts on the basics. And another reason why is, guys, it's hard to recognize that the basics are not being done until a consequence occurs, because I could safely assume that most people think that they're being done, and for the people that falsified, shit hits the fan, you never know what's going to happen. And they're going to go back and check everything that you said from months ago. And, if you're not on point, and if there's a reason why you couldn't do your search, then say it. We're understaffed. I wasn't able to do it. I'm sorry. And then let people know, put in the logbook. But sometimes we get so complacent, I'll just put it in. But it's like, yeah, but now you just lied, when it was just easier for you just to document the concern, so you couldn't do it today. Because now look what happens. This escape just occurred. And now they're going back to, well, when was the last time these areas were searched? Oh, they were searched these. Well, that's what they said. But now I'm checking the camera. They don't even walk around. And it's an understaffed. It's not, maybe not. But if you're not walking around and you're not making the effort, and when you say it's understaffed, that's usually because you got to be here, but you're over here. It's not because, well, I'm not walking around, I don't care about doing my job. That's nothing to do with understaffing. Understaffing is more of I can't be 2 places at once. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. Not, I don't feel like doing my job, And granted, even I will say this, sometimes we're burned out. I get it. And maybe you didn't have a chance to do the searches. Let somebody know. That's it. Don't document that you've done it. Today, I'm sorry, Sarge. I'm worked my 3rd double in a row. I'm just not, feeling it right now. But let me just tell you, I wasn't able to get this stuff done, as opposed to, I'm not doing them. I'm just too tired. And then write down that you're doing them. You will be held accountable and responsible. Hey, what's your thoughts, Russ? Closing.
Just dovetailing a little bit on what Joe said there, but I just want the people to think about 2 words: causality and consequence. And the thing that you should always try and keep foremost in your mind is, what is the action or inaction that I'm about to take going to cause? As far as the causality, how is it going to lead to a consequence for me? If it's a good consequence, hey, I'm going to get promoted, I'm going to get recognized, I'm going to detect some contraband, I'm going to stop an escape. That's good. But if the consequence is going to be, I'm going to allow an escape, I'm going to, end up losing my job, We know that that's all bad. But can you actually take and construct in your mind how those things unfold? Get better at it, get used to being able to think critically. These guys, did they ever think about what was going to happen because they didn't, take the shoes from that guy and give him a separate set? Apparently not, and so did they ever think, well, what happens if someone smuggles a weapon on? What if somebody's able to cut through the fence? What if somebody's, able to manufacture something where they can make a blow dart and hit that driver in the neck or something like that? you know think about what might happen in any given circumstance. Make things up. That's why that what if game is so important, and not just about what might happen out there on a daily basis, but what inmates can come up with unlimited time to sit there and think about how they can get away with something or how they can make something happen.
Yeah, and guys, I want to mention something too. When you have one officer circumventing stuff, complacent, then you have another officer, then you have the supervisor, then you have the transport team. It's a culture matter. It was a culture matter the moment two officers did it. Like one officer, I'm going to get you. Hopefully your peer, corrects you, but then your peer does it, and then your supervisor gives the inmate that bag, and then the transport team comes. They don't fully watch you strip. That's a culture problem, guys. I mean, that's literally now going at the highest level, and then making changes there, and then working its way down. This is yes a bottom up concern, but more importantly, it's a top down matter, because if I was complacent, my partner would correct me. But if I'm complacent and my partner's complacent, and then my sergeant's complacent, these have become normal habits. These have become routines. And then granted, guys, this becomes the way of life. This becomes what's accepted. And next thing you know, it's just a matter of time. It just this. Can I be honest with you? When you look at it right now, this was all bound to happen. It just happened to be this one person was watching them all the time and realized all this and said, you know what, I'm going to take advantage of it. I mean, everything from the strips to the avoiding the boss chair to medical telling them when their appointment is. I mean, when they said at the very beginning that every fail-safe could go wrong, and that's what happened here, every fail-safe went wrong. Supervisors not doing their rounds. I mean, every fail-safe that's meant to be put in place to stop this from happening. And again, when I start seeing that there's a bunch of people involved, I stop and I look up. You got to be held responsible, because at this point here, this is a culture of complacency. It's not individual complacency. It's a culture of complacency. All right, guys, as always, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. 3 hours and 16 minutes later. Stay safe.